A federal marshal rides into a quiet basin and walks straight into a war no one will admit exists. CAPROCK Range. Chapter 1. The sky over the Cimarron Breaks country pulled itself from black to purple to the color of an old bruise, and in the east, along the saw-edged horizon, a thin line of orange lay like a coal just beginning to catch. No wind. The grass stood still as paint. Marshal Holt had been riding since before the dark thinned, and the gruel mare moved under him with the mechanical patience of a horse that had stopped caring about destinations some time ago, and concerned herself now only with the immediate negotiation of ground. 3 days. He was 3 days behind Decker Foy, which put him in a mood that did not improve with company, and so it was fortunate there was none. Foy had killed a postal agent named Greer outside the Dodge City Depot on a Thursday afternoon, in plain sight of 6 citizens, then rode south with the same indifference a man might bring to a trip to the general store. That indifference was what Holt kept coming back to, not the killing itself. The country produced killers the way it produced dust, thoroughly and without apology. But Foy's quality of not caring, that specific lightness he carried, said something about the distance between them and where it was likely to end. The mare's ears came forward. Holt felt it before he consciously registered it, a shift in the animal's attention, the slight gathering in her neck and withers. He looked ahead to where the trail dropped toward a line of cottonwoods following some underground wet that hadn't yet given up. In the gray light, the trees were the color of smoke. He touched the mare gently with his left knee, and she moved off the trail and into the bunch grass, picking her way without instruction, putting the trees off his right shoulder at 100 yards before he stopped her. He sat and listened to the country. A meadowlark. The dry tick of grasshoppers in the cooling grass. Below that, almost below hearing, the suggestion of running water. And beneath that, nothing alarming. No horses. No men. Just the smell, the particular rotting sweetness of cottonwood bark over moving water, and over that something else that the smell of the trees was not quite covering. He rode in. The cottonwoods grew in a dense stand along a creek that ran maybe 8 inches deep over flat limestone, cold and clear enough to count the stones on the bottom. The trunks were thick and pale gray in the early light, their high canopies not yet filling with the sound of morning birds. Holt rode under them, and the air temperature dropped 10 degrees and the smell of the water came up strong and clean, and he let the mare drop her head and drink before he looked up and saw the man. He hung from the largest cottonwood, from a limb that forked 12 feet up and grew out over the creek. New manila rope, not yet weathered. His hands were bound in front of him with a shorter piece of the same rope. Someone had used what they brought and brought enough. His boots were gone, his wool socks too, and his bare feet hung pale and still in the shadows, the toes pointing slightly inward, the way feet do when a man has been dead long enough for everything to relax. He wore canvas trousers and a collarless shirt the color of dry sage, and there were fibers caught at his shirt buttons, short, coarse curls of fleece, pale gray, that Holt looked at for a long time. The mare finished drinking and raised her head. Water ran from her chin in silver threads. "All right," Holt said to no one. He got down, looped her reins over a branch stub low enough that she could graze the creek bank grass if she wanted, and walked a slow circle around the base of the cottonwood before he touched anything. The ground was damp enough here to hold prints. 4 horses shod the hoof edges crisp, not long gone, maybe 6 hours, certainly before midnight. One of the men who'd stood here had a boot with a worn heel that tracked a half-inch drag on the left side, a limp or a habit which amounted to the same thing. They'd stood in a cluster below the man while he hung, which meant they'd watched it, which meant they'd done it, and then stayed to confirm the doing of it. That was deliberate. That was a statement rather than a panic. He went back to the mare and took the rope from his saddle, threw it over the limb above the hanging man, took his knife and cut the rope clean at the knot. The body came down fast, and he caught as much of it as he could, which was not all of it. They hit the ground together in the cold mud of the creek bank, and Holt held the man's shoulders and eased his head back from the limestone, and then sat back on his heels and looked at him. He was perhaps 50, perhaps less. The sort of man whose face accumulates years faster than a calendar demands. Dark skin, dark hair going silver at the temples, a jaw that had known hard weather. His hands, bound together at the wrists, were the wrong kind of calloused for cattle work. The web of the thumb, the pads below the fingers, the particular roughness that comes from rope work at close quarters with animals smaller and more nervous than cattle. A sheep man. The wool fibers at his buttons confirmed it. Holt took his knife and cut the rope from the man's wrists, not because it mattered now, but because it seemed the right thing, and folded the man's hands together across his sternum. "You get heavier when you're dead," Holt said. "You know that?" The man had no comment on this. "Somebody took your boots. I'd like to know why that is." He studied the man's face another moment. "I'd like to know a lot of things. Getting a dead man onto the back of a horse is undignified work, and the mare had opinions about it that she communicated through her body rather than her voice, a stiffening, a sideways step, a rolling of the eye, but she was a professional and eventually stood while Holt wrestled the body across her haunches, belly down, and lashed it with enough rope to keep it from sliding. He did this with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who had done it before, and not with any satisfaction. Then he stood and adjusted his hat and looked back at the cottonwood where the cut rope still hung from the limb over the creek. The morning light was coming down through the canopy now, in long slanted beams, white and dusty, the kind of early light that makes everything look temporary. Which, Holt reflected, it was. He climbed back into the saddle and reined the mare south along the creek until the trees thinned and the land opened up into the wide benchland, the grass silver-green in the dawn and running to the edge of the CAPROCK a mile east. Up on the bench, too far to hear but clear enough to see in the clean pre-heat air, something white moved against the grass. He watched it for a moment. Sheep. A flock spread wide across the upper bench, grazing in the stillness, attended by the small dark shapes of dogs working the outer edges. He watched them the way he watched everything, without conclusion. He filed it. To the south, the thin pencil line of a windmill. Below that, the flattened geometry of a town, false fronts and the silver gleam of a water tower. He put the mare south along the bench road and did not look back at the cottonwood grove. The dead have a way of making themselves the center of every room they're carried into. It doesn't matter that they've given up the capacity for drama. The people still living do it for them. He was a mile out when the shot came. The crack of it split the morning quiet like a thrown axe, and the bullet kicked up a rooster tail of Kalichi 6 feet ahead of the mare's right front hoof. She stopped dead. Did not rear, did not bolt. She'd been shot past enough times that she understood the geometry of a warning round. Holt sat still in the saddle, both hands loose on the reins, and did not reach for anything on his belt or in his scabbard. He waited. Off to his left, from a cut in the bluffs where the CAPROCK dropped away in a broken shelf of red and tan limestone, 3 riders came. They rode at an easy pace, the pace of men who'd already made their decision about how this was going to go, and saw no reason to hurry it along. The one in the middle sat a big blood bay, and carried a Winchester across his saddle-bow, with the comfort of a man who thought about it about as much as he thought about breathing. He was wide through the chest, 40 or so, with a jaw like the prow of a riverboat, and a hat that cost money. The two on either side were younger, harder-looking, riding with the loose-shouldered readiness of men who considered violence a reasonable first option rather than a last. They pulled up at 30 feet. The man on the blood bay looked at the body across the mare's haunches, then at Holt, then back at the body with the expression of a man checking inventory. "That man on your horse," he said pleasantly, "is stolen property, Marshal. We'll be taking him back." His voice had a Texas drawl that had been wearing down for years, like a boot heel. He'd seen the badge before he spoke. Holt registered that. "Property," Holt said. "The word bother you? It's an interesting choice for a person." The man on the blood bay tilted his head a fraction. The Winchester did not move. "He's a sheepherder." Was a sheepherder. He was trespassing on Anchor Range when he met with his misfortune, and the anchor has a legitimate interest in the matter of how he's handled and where he ends up. "Anchor," Holt said. "Drummond cattle. I'm Cruz. Foreman." He said it the way men say their name, when they believe the name is doing considerable work on their behalf. Holt looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the two flankers, taking his time with each of them the way a man takes his time at cards, and then he looked back at Cruz. "He meet with his misfortune from a cottonwood tree? 12 feet up. New rope, 4 riders, man with a bad left boot." Something moved through Cruz's face and settled again. "He was found. With his hands tied. That's how he was found. And his boots off." Cruz said nothing to that. "He was found," Holt said, "because he was left. There's a difference." He reached inside his coat slowly enough that nobody needed to do anything about it, and produced a folded paper. U.S. Marshal's authority, signed in Wichita. He held it up between 2 fingers without offering it across the distance. "I'm taking this man to whatever serves as a coroner in," he glanced toward the town, "wherever that is." "Arroyo Seco," one of the flankers said, and then appeared to wish he hadn't. "Arroyo Seco." Holt folded the paper and put it back. "You want to ride along, you're welcome to. You want to file a complaint about federal interference in the disposition of found property, you can do that in writing to the Marshal's office in Wichita, Kansas. Somebody there will get around to it." He gathered the mare's reins. "Or you can shoot me and take the body. That's an option. I'd think on it pretty hard before you decided it was the right one." He held Cruz's eyes and waited. And the waiting was the easy part because the math was obvious, and Cruz was smart enough to do it. One dead federal marshal was a problem that did not get smaller. 3 witnesses to the shooting of a federal marshal was a problem that ended at the end of a rope. Cruz's jaw tightened once. His thumb found the Winchester's hammer and did not pull it and moved away again. "You're making a considerable mistake," he said. "This is range war country, Marshal. The lines are drawn, and they've been drawn a while. A man rides into something like this from outside, without understanding the particulars. He can find himself on the wrong side before he knows there is one. Which side's the one that ties a man's hands before they hang him?" The silence that followed was of a specific quality, the kind that means something has been said that can't be unsaid, and everyone present knows it. Cruz pulled his horse back a step. The flankers followed, responsive as shadows. "Enjoy Arroyo Seco," Cruz said, and the pleasantness in his voice had gone somewhere else. "It's a real sociable town." He turned the blood bay and put him back toward the cut in the bluffs at a walk, not looking back, the 2 flankers following. They rode slowly. That was important. Men who've lost something ride slowly when they want you to know they haven't decided it's permanent. Holt watched them until the bluff swallowed them. Then he sat for another full minute in the warming silence, watching the space where they'd been, before he touched the mare's flank and started her south again. He rode with the particular quality of attention that a man develops after years of moving through country that wants to kill him. Not paranoia, which is noise, but awareness, which is signal. The land around the bench road was open enough that nothing could approach within 400 yards without being seen, and the morning light was now fully committed, burning the purple out of the sky and leaving a hard ceramic blue that would be spectacular for another 2 hours before the heat turned it white. He thought about the wool fibers on the dead man's shirt. He thought about new rope. He thought about Cruz saying, sociable, the way a man says loaded. The town of Arroyo Seco announced itself gradually. The smell of it first, wood smoke and livestock, and the particular dry-baked smell of adobe and alkali, then the sound of it, a rooster and a hammer and something with wheels on packed dirt. And then the town itself coming up from the flat in increments, the water tower, the grain elevator, the tops of the false fronts with their optimistic architectural ambitions, a church steeple gone slightly lopsided from the last hard blow. The main street ran east to west and was wide enough for 2 freight wagons to pass each other without discussion. It had been built for a prosperity that had half arrived and then lost interest. Holt rode in from the north along the bench road, and every eye on the street found him within 30 seconds. Not because of the badge. They couldn't see the badge at distance. Because of what was across the back of his horse. A town always knows before anyone explains anything. News travels at the speed of looking, and people in hard country have learned to look at everything the moment it appears on the horizon. He pulled up in front of a building with a hand-lettered sign that read Sheriff Arroyo Seco, D. Rivas, and sat the mare and waited. 30 seconds later, the door opened. The sheriff was perhaps 65, built low to the ground with the kind of face that weather makes over decades, not ugly, just resolved, all the softness burned or dried or worked out of it. He wore no hat, which meant he'd been inside, and he moved out onto the step with the unhurried rolling walk of a man whose hips had filed a long-standing complaint about horses and whose commitment to the badge had outlasted any reasonable advice to quit. He looked at the body across the mare's haunches. He looked at Holt. He rubbed the back of his neck once. Where'd you find him? Cottonwood Grove. 6 miles north along the bench road. Creek crossing. The sheriff looked at the dead man's bare feet, hanging in the morning air. Something crossed his face that was not quite surprise, which meant it was recognition of a specific and unhappy kind. He said quietly, Ariola. You know him. I know him. He looked up at Holt. How long you in town for, Marshal? Passing through. I'm behind a man named Foy, Decker Foy, federal warrant out of Wichita, murder. Foy. The sheriff turned the name over. Don't know him. Which way's he running? South. Or was 3 days ago. The sheriff nodded slowly, not at anything Holt had said, but at something he was working out privately. He put his hands in his back pockets and looked down the street and then back at the dead man. The morning had started to heat up. Flies had found Ariola already and were being the particular kind of industrious that flies are around the dead. Third one, the sheriff said. Holt didn't say anything. Third Amaya man in 6 weeks. Other 2 were ruled accidents. First one drowned in a creek that a child could ford on a dry year. Second one's horse threw him on flat ground with no stones. He looked at Holt from under heavy gray brows. I'm Sheriff Dolph Rivas. I'd be grateful if you'd step down and come inside. Holt looked at the dead man. He looked down the street, at the faces still watching from doorways and boardwalks, faces that held the particular look of a town that has been waiting for something to get worse and has just seen the next installment arrive. He looked back at Rivas. Foy was 4 days south now. Maybe 5. The trail was cold enough already that another hour was not going to materially damage it. He told himself this, the way a man tells himself something he has mostly already decided. He stepped down from the mare. The sheriff's office was one room with a rack of rifles along one wall, a desk that had taken considerable punishment over the years and bore the record of it, a cold potbelly stove, and 2 cells in the back that smelled of old whitewash and something less pleasant that the whitewash had been applied to address. Rivas poured coffee from a pot that had been sitting since God knew when, and handed a cup to Holt, and they both stood at the single front window that looked onto the street, where a boy of perhaps 12 was now standing very still, and staring at the body on the mare's back with the focused scientific interest that boys bring to dead things. "Range war," Rivas said. He said it the way a man says a diagnosis. 2 years in the making. Maybe longer, if you count the grumbling. He wrapped both hands around his cup. Silas Drummond runs the Anchor cattle operation, been in this basin 20 years, good grass, decent water. Then 2 years ago, a Basque family name of Amaya took a grazing lease on the upper bench. Legal lease. Filed proper in Santa Fe, recorded in the county book. Old man Tomas Amaya, his son Enrique, and his daughter Pilar. They run sheep. Drummond doesn't like sheep. Nobody running cattle in this country likes sheep. That's not unique. What's unique is that Drummond is the kind of man who does something about what he doesn't like, and the Amayas are the kind of people who don't move. He sipped the coffee and grimaced at it. Drummond says the sheep foul the water and overgraze the bench, and his cattle won't drink where sheep have been. The Amayas say the bench is their legal range, and the water was already alkaline before they arrived. Both of them have lawyers writing letters to Santa Fe. And somebody's been writing different letters, Holt said. Rivas looked at him sideways. Areola was found in a cottonwood tree with new rope. New rope and 4 horses. Man with a bad left boot. Anchor brand on those horses, I'm guessing. If you can prove it. I can't prove anything at the moment. Holt set the cup down on the windowsill. Man named Cruz came out from the bluffs after I cut Areola down. Called him property. The sheriff's jaw set. That sounds like Cruz. He say anything to you about the first 2 dead men? Cruz doesn't come to me. Drummond comes to me. Drummond is a different kind of problem than Cruz. He's not stupid, and he's not a brute. And I believe he means it when he says he wants this resolved without more bodies. But he's also a man who's accustomed to the country going the way he points it. The Amayas are the first thing in 20 years that hasn't. Rivas turned from the window. I've got 1 deputy, Marshal. Pete Garza. Good man. But there's 12 anchor hands, and about 6 herders working for the Amayas. And the way the sentiment's running in this town, I couldn't put together a posse if I tried. Half the businesses here run on anchor money. Holt looked at him steadily. You asking me for something, Sheriff? Rivas met his eyes and didn't flinch away from what was plainly a hard question for a man with as much pride as sense. I'm telling you the situation, he said carefully. I'm telling you that Areola makes 3 dead men who worked for the Amayas, that I've got no jurisdiction beyond this county line, and that the county line in this particular direction puts me about 4 miles from the Anchor's front gate. He paused. I'm also telling you that the Amaya camp is 6 miles up the bench road, and that a federal marshal has jurisdiction I don't, and that it seems to me a man going south after Foy would naturally pass in that direction. Holt looked out the window. The boy was still there, still studying the body with that solemn scientific attention. A woman, his mother by the authority in her walk, came out of the hardware store, got one look at what her son was studying, grabbed him by the collar, and pulled him away without breaking stride. The boy's feet moved in a reluctant backward shuffle, his head turned and craning for as long as physics would allow. Naturally, Holt said. He picked up his hat from the desk where he'd set it. Get Areola somewhere appropriate. I'll need to talk to the family. I'll send Garza up to let them know. Don't. Let me tell them. He started for the door. What else can you tell me about that family? Rivas thought for a moment. Tomas Amaya is 60-some, arthritic, came over from the Pyrenees when he was 20, and has been running sheep in New Mexico for 40 years. He speaks English when it suits him, and Basque when it doesn't. A brief expression, not quite a smile, not quite anything else. Enrique went to school in Reno. Sharp. Knows the law better than most lawyers I've dealt with. He's been writing the letters to Santa Fe himself. Another pause. Pilar is 26. She's the one who runs the flock day to day. Sharp as Enrique and twice as careful. Careful how? The kind of careful that comes from being a Basque sheepwoman in the middle of a cattle county. She watches everything, and she doesn't tell you what she's thinking until she's decided what she's thinking. And by then she's usually right. He looked at Holt. She's also the one who came to me 2 weeks ago and told me Areola was worried about something. That somebody had been following the flock. I told her I'd look into it. His jaw worked. Areola is the third dead man. Holt considered this. Then he put his hat on and opened the door, and the full weight of the morning heat came through it like something solid. I'll be back this afternoon, he said. He stepped out into the street and untied the mare and started to mount, then stopped with one hand on the pommel and looked at the place across the mare's haunches where Areola had been. Rivas or the boy, more likely the boy, had done him the small dignity of closing his eyes at some point. His hands were folded on his chest now. The morning light lay across his face without expression. A sheep man. Wrong calluses. Wool fibers at the buttons. Somebody had taken his boots, and Holt would not stop thinking about the boots, not because boots were worth stealing, but because of what it meant to take them. It was a message. It said, less than m greater than you walked onto this ground, and you are not walking off it. Less than m greater than it said. Less than m greater than we are not worried about being identified because we are not afraid of what comes next. Less than m greater than. It said a great deal about who held the power in this basin, and how long they'd held it, and how used they'd gotten to holding it. He mounted up. He turned the mare north toward the bench road, and started her at an easy jog, and the town of Arroyo Seco watched him go the way small towns watch things they don't fully understand yet, but have the instinctive knowledge are about to become their problem. He was a quarter-mile out when he looked up toward the bench and saw the white drift of the Amaya flock against the high grass, and below it, where the bench road climbed in a series of switchbacks up the CAPROCK face, a figure on horseback had stopped and was watching him come. Too far to read clearly. Slight build, dark clothing, still as a fence post. He rode on. 5 minutes later the figure was still there, still watching, and he could see now that it was a woman. She sat her horse without apparent concern at his approach, which was either the confidence of someone who had nothing to fear or someone who had stopped counting on fear to be useful. He filed that too. He was still 200 yards from the switchbacks when the rifle shot came from behind him, and high from the CAPROCK rim, from somewhere in the broken limestone that overhung the bench road. And the bullet punched through his left coat sleeve, between his elbow and his shoulder, and he felt the wind of it along his arm, and was off the mare and behind a limestone outcrop in the same motion, his rifle out of the scabbard, the mare running 20 feet before she slowed, and turned, and looked at him with the expression of a horse who has decided that this is, in fact, a perfectly normal Tuesday. He lay flat against the rock, and looked back up at the CAPROCK rim, 120 feet above, and saw nothing. A hawk quartered in the thermals above the rim's edge, banking east. The grass along the bench road stood perfectly still. There was no second shot. Whoever was on the rim knew what a single shot would cost. It was a statement, like the rope and the bare feet, not an attempt to kill. Or it was an amateur who'd flinched. The woman on horseback had not moved. She was watching him from the switchback, head level, horse loose and comfortable under her. He studied her from behind the outcrop for a moment, and she let him study her. Then she called down in a voice that cut the morning air cleanly. "Whoever fired that is gone now," she said. "He was on the rim for 20 minutes before you rode into range." "You watched him?" "I watched the whole rim. I always watch the rim." A pause. "You are the Marshal Holt." "Pilar, Amaya." Her voice was controlled and careful, and said nothing beyond the words themselves. "You have come about Areola." It was not a question. "Yes." She turned her horse and started up the switchback toward the bench, not waiting for him, the assumption in her movement as plain as print, that he would follow, that she had already decided how much to tell him, and that whatever he found out on the bench today would be exactly what she chose for him to find out, no more, no less. He came out from behind the outcrop, caught the mare, checked his coat sleeve where the bullet had passed through, clean, 2 holes, a half-inch of air between the fabric and his arm. He looked back up at the rim. Nothing moved up there. Just the hawk, patient in the hot updraft, circling. He put his foot in the stirrup and followed Pilar Amaya up the switchbacks toward whatever she had decided to show him. Chapter 2. Cruz let the silence run for 3 full seconds before he pulled the blood bay back. He did it slowly, with the precision of a man who has lost the argument and wants the credit for not losing his composure along with it. The 2 flankers followed his lead. Nobody said anything. They turned and put the bluffs between themselves and the bench road, and the sound of their horses on the hardpan faded, and the country went quiet again, in the way that country does after trouble has passed through and hasn't decided whether to come back. Holt watched the notch in the bluffs for a full minute after the last sound of them. Then he looked at the sky, which was committing fully now to a hard blue promise of heat, and put the mare south. He thought about Boots. The thinking was not sentimental. It was operational. A man who robs the dead takes money, weapons, a good coat. The boots off a hanged sheepherder had no particular value unless they were exceptional boots, which these were not. The dead man's feet showed the particular callousing of a man who wore the same worn pair every day for years. You don't take a dead man's boots for profit. You take them for the same reason you use new rope, because you're making a statement to anyone who finds him, and you want the statement to be complete. It said, "We ended him, and we were not afraid while we did it." He rode. The town of Arroyo Seco had been laid out with ambition by someone who believed the railroad was coming and had not yet received word that the railroad had different plans. The main street was wide enough for 2 freight wagons to pass without conversation, and the false fronts along its north side rose 2 stories into the hot sky with the particular architectural confidence of buildings that expected to be surrounded by other buildings soon. They were not. The side streets tapered into caliche and scrub within 50 yards of the main drag, and the south side of the street showed what the town had actually become. 3 saloons doing the work that 6 businesses once shared, a feed store with an honest coat of paint, a land office with a less honest one, a hotel that had last seen prosperity during someone's grandfather's time. Holt read a town the way he read a face, not for what it said it was, but for what it couldn't stop being. This one said, cattle money, cattleman's politics, a population that had made its peace with the arrangement and needed it to stay the way it was. The Amaya family's lawyers in Santa Fe would get very polite letters with very slow responses. The anchor's lawyer, whoever he was, would get lunch. He counted faces as he rode in. Not people, faces which were different. Faces told you who had an opinion about what was across his horse, and who was just watching out of the ordinary human appetite for incident. The woman in the doorway of the dressmaker's shop had the fixed expression of someone who recognized the dead man and was deciding whether to show it. Two men at the feed store hitching post stopped talking and did not resume. A boy of perhaps 12 detached himself from the boardwalk in front of the hardware and followed at a respectful scientific distance. The sheriff's office occupied the north side mid-block, a squat adobe structure with a hand-lettered board above the door, Sheriff Arroyo Seco, D. Rivas. The D was larger than the rest, which told Holt something about the man before he met him. He pulled up in front and sat the mare. 30 seconds. The door opened. Sheriff Dolph Rivas came through the door with the careful rolling gait of a man whose hips had been in dispute with horses for 20 years and whose commitment to the work had outlasted any sensible advice to find a different line. He was 60 or near it, built low and broad with a face that weather and work and a certain quality of undeceived attention had reduced to its essentials. Gray at the temples. A badge that had been polished recently, which Holt noticed. The eyes were the eyes of a man who had seen enough dishonesty that honesty in others hit him with the small surprise of an unexpected gift. He came down the step and looked at the body draped across the mare's haunches. He stood there long enough that the boy who'd been following Holt arrived, breathless, and took up a position at a respectful distance and also looked. Rivas didn't tell the boy to go away. He looked at the dead man's bare feet hanging in the climbing light, at the marks on the wrists from the rope, and he rubbed the back of his neck once with one hand and said quietly, the way a man says the name of something he was afraid would happen. Ariola. You know him, Holt said. I know him. Rivas looked up. His eyes did a quick inventory of Holt, the badge, the road dust, the way he sat his horse. How long you in town for, Marshal? Passing through. I'm 3 days behind a man named Foy, Decker Foy, federal warrant out of Wichita. Murder. Don't know the name. Rivas's gaze went back to Ariola. Which way's he running? South. Maybe southeast. Rivas nodded at something he was working out privately. He put both hands in his back pockets and looked down the street, past the two men at the feed store who were still not talking, past the woman at the dressmaker's who was still in her doorway, and then back. He said, "This is the third." Holt waited. Third man working for the Amaya flock, found dead in 6 weeks. First one drowned in a creek you could walk across on a dry year without getting your boot tops wet. Second one's horse threw him on flat ground. He looked at the marks on Ariola's wrists. I ruled them accidents. I'm going to stop doing that. Cottonwood Grove 6 miles north, Holt said. New rope, 4 horses shod, 1 man with a worn-down left boot heel. They stood and watched him. Left the rope hanging. He paused. Man named Cruz came out of the bluffs after I cut him down. Told me Ariola was stolen property. Rivas's jaw set. It set the way a jaw does when the muscle has made that particular movement many times before out of the same frustration and has developed a memory for it. That sounds like Cruz, he said. Come inside. The office was 1 room that had been trying to be 2 for years and not quite getting there. A rifle rack on the east wall with 4 long guns and 3 empty slots that suggested a recent departure of deputies or confidants or both. A desk that had absorbed 20 years of elbows, boot heels, coffee cups, and probably at least 1 fist. A potbelly stove, cold in the summer heat. At the back, 2 cells with doors standing open, and the smell of old whitewash applied with optimism over something that whitewash cannot address. Rivas poured coffee from a pot on the stove's firebox shelf. It had been sitting since before dawn, by its color and consistency. He handed a cup to Holt without apology, and took one himself, and stood at the single window that looked onto the main street, where the boy was still conducting his examination of the body across the mare's back with the unhurried methodology of a natural scientist. "Range war," Rivas said. He said it the way a doctor says a diagnosis he's been hoping to avoid. 2 years in the making, longer if you count the tension that was there before. He sipped the coffee, made no face. "Silas Drummond runs the Anchor cattle operation. Been in this basin since before the war. Good grass, decent water off the CAPROCK, enough acreage that he's never had to ask anyone for anything." He paused. 20 years of not asking anyone for anything changes a man. Changes him how? Makes him believe the country owes him what the country's been giving him. Makes the word legal sound like something other people need. He looked at his coffee. 2 years ago, the Amaya family took a grazing lease on the upper bench. Basque, the old man, came over from the Pyrenees 40 years ago, been running sheep in this territory since before most of the men in this county were born. His son Enrique filed the lease himself. Proper survey, proper filing, recorded in Santa Fe and in the county book right there. He nodded at a ledger on the desk. Drummond's response to that was to send Cruz to tell old Tomas Amaya that the bench was anchor range by custom, and always had been. Tomas Amaya, who does not speak English when it suits him not to, listened to this, and then told Cruz something in Basque. Enrique told me later it translated roughly as "go to hell." Holt almost smiled. He didn't. "That was the beginning," Rivas said. "Since then there've been cut fences, fouled water troughs, a dog killed, and now 3 dead herders ruled as accidents." The word accidents came out with a specific bitterness, the bitterness of a man judging his own past decisions. Drummond's position is that his cattle won't drink after sheep, says the sheep foul the water and overgraze the bench grass and depress the quality of the whole range. The Amayas say the water was alkaline before they ever put a sheep on the bench, and they have the survey to prove the lease is legal, and they are not going anywhere. He set his cup down on the windowsill. Both of them have lawyers writing letters to Santa Fe. Only one of them has cowboys who know where Basques sleep. Drummond know about the hangings. Before this one? Rivas was quiet for a moment, in the careful way of a man choosing between 2 honest answers. He knows what Cruz does. Whether he's sanctioned all of it, I can't prove that, and Drummond is smart enough to keep what he can't afford to know at arm's length. He turned from the window. "Here's what I can tell you about Silas Drummond. He's not a stupid man, and he is not, I believe, a cruel one. He's a man who built something real over 20 years and cannot process the idea of it being diminished by what he considers an intrusion. And he has made the mistake that powerful men make, which is surrounding himself with people who are more willing to be cruel on his behalf than he knows or wants to know." Cruz and others. 3-4 hands on the anchor who like the work they've been given. He looked at Holt. "I have 1 deputy. Pete Garza. Good man, smart, but he's one man. I could not put together a posse if I tried. 3/4 of the commerce in this town runs on anchor money in one form or another." Holt looked at him steadily. Rivas met the look. He had too much pride to ask directly, and too much sense not to ask at all. "I'm telling you the situation," he said. "I'm also telling you that the Amaya camp is 6 miles north along the Bench Road, which is the direction a man riding south after Foy would naturally come from." He paused. "And that there are things the Amayas will tell a federal marshal. They won't tell a county sheriff who's ruled 2 of their men accidental." "What makes you think that?" "Because Pilar Amaya came to me 2 weeks ago and told me Ariola believed someone was following the flock. that a stranger had been seen twice on the east rim above the bench. I told her I'd look into it. His voice did not change, but something behind it did. I didn't get up there. I had a situation in town that week, and I told myself I'd ride up in a day or two. He looked at his hands. Ariola is the third dead man. The sentence sat there between them, in the hot, still air of the office without either of them adding anything to it. Holt put his cup down on the desk. Get Ariola somewhere appropriate. I'll need to talk to the family. I'll send Garza up ahead of you. Don't. Holt picked up his hat. Let me bring the news. The family should hear it from the man who cut him down, not from a deputy who heard it from the sheriff, who heard it from a passing federal marshal. He started for the door. What can you tell me about them? Each of them. Rivas thought for a moment, choosing. Tomas is 62, 63. Bad hands from 40 years of rope work. He came from a place in the mountains between France and Spain that doesn't consider itself either one. And he has that quality that people from hard places have. He is genuinely not afraid of difficulty. The difficulty of this country, the difficulty of Drummond, none of it registers on him the way it would on a man who hadn't come from worse. He paused. He speaks English fine when he needs to. You'll know when he's decided he doesn't need to. Enrique. Enrique went to school in Reno. Reads law, or reads enough of it to be useful. He is the one writing the letters to Santa Fe, filing the responses to Drummond's lawyer, keeping every record of every incident in a leather-bound journal he keeps in the camp tent. 27 years old, and conducting himself like a man of 40. Controlled. Careful. The kind of careful that comes from understanding exactly how much room there is for a Basque sheepman in a cattle county, and deciding to give that room no further. And Pilar. Rivas was quiet a moment. Not the pause of a man thinking about what to say, but the pause of a man deciding how much truth a question has earned. Pilar runs the flock. Day to day, the decisions, the dogs, the grazing rotation, which bench to move to when. She's 26. She's been running sheep since she was 12, and she knows this particular range better now than men who've been on it for 30 years. He looked at Holt. She watches everything. She doesn't tell you what she's concluded from it until she's ready, and by the time she's ready, she's usually right. Another pause. She also came to me 3 weeks before she came about the man on the rim. Came to tell me about the first dead man. Told me Yaregui, that was his name, the one who drowned, told me Yaregui could swim, had always been able to swim, and that the creek where they found him ran 2 feet deep at the most generous measurement. He looked at his hands. I filed an accident report. Holt looked at him for a moment without expression. Then he put on his hat and opened the door. The heat came through it like a hand on the chest. He got as far as the mare. He was checking the lashing that held Ariola. It had shifted slightly on the ride in, and the dead deserved better than to come loose on a main street, when he heard the boot heels on the boardwalk behind him and turned. The woman moving toward him was perhaps 30, dark-haired, in a gray wool skirt that had been mended at the hem, and a collarless blouse with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. She moved with the purpose of someone who had decided to do this before she was ready, and was not going to let not being ready stop her. Behind her, hanging back at the door of the land office like a man who knew better than to follow, stood a younger man in a decent coat, who watched with the patient tension of someone who had argued against this and lost. She stopped at a distance that was close enough for conversation, and far enough to look at Ariola properly. She did. She held his face in her gaze for a long time without any visible change in her expression, and then she looked at Holt. Her eyes were dark brown, nearly black, and they held the flat, careful quality of eyes that had learned to give nothing away until there was something worth giving. "You found him," she said. It was not a question. "Cottonwood Grove. North end of the Bench Road." She nodded, as if she had expected the grove specifically. "Were his hands bound?" "Yes." Something crossed her face, brief and controlled, and was gone. "I am Pilar, Amaya." "I know." He introduced himself. She already knew. The town was not large, and he had ridden in with a dead man and spoken to the sheriff, and she had clearly been watching from the land office since before he dismounted. That was worth noting. "I'm coming up to the bench to speak with your family," he said. "I'm sorry to carry this news." She looked at him directly and without sentiment. "You did not make this news. You are carrying it because no one else would." She said it as a statement of fact rather than generosity. "There is something you should know before you come up." "All right." She glanced at the land office, at the young man in the doorway, her brother clearly, the same dark eyes and the same quality of controlled attention, and he came forward at the look. She said something to him in Basque, 3 words, and he turned and went back inside. She looked at Holt. "Areola found something," she said. 8-9 days ago. Below the bench, in the draw where the East CAPROCK drops off. Survey stakes. New ones, driven recent. Not our stakes. We know every stake on our lease line, and these were inside it, not on it. Someone had surveyed a line through the middle of our lease." Holt was still. "He pulled 2 of them," she said. "Brought them back to camp. My brother was going to write to Santa Fe about it. We did not yet know who drove them." "When did Areola go missing?" She held his gaze. 6 days ago. He went to check the east draw again. He said he'd seen a man on the rim, 2 days before that, watching the flock from the CAPROCK. She paused. "I told Sheriff Rivas about the man on the rim." "I know. He told me." She accepted this without judgment, which was itself a kind of judgment. "Come up this afternoon," she said. "My brother has the stakes, and a map he drew of where they were driven. My father will want to speak with you." She looked at Areola one more time, and this time the control slipped fractionally, a tightening around the eyes, a slight compression of the mouth, and then it was back. "Areola came with us from New Mexico. He worked for my father for 11 years. She turned and walked back toward the land office. Holt watched her go. She did not look back. The young man in the doorway, Enrique, held the door for her and then looked at Holt over her head for a moment. His expression said, "I have been watching this county close its fist around my family for 2 years, and I am running out of legal remedies, and you are a federal marshal, and I need you to understand the weight of that before you decide how long you're staying." He said none of this. He went inside. Rivas came out of the sheriff's office while Holt was still at the mare. He had his hat on now, and his deputy, Pete Garza, behind him, a lean man of perhaps 35, Mexican, with the quiet, careful bearing of a man who had learned to do his job well in a county that had not made it easy for him to do it at all. Rivas said, "Wire came in while you were talking to Miss Amaya. Federal Land Office, Santa Fe." He held out a folded paper. "Drummond's filed a formal complaint against the Amaya lease. Says the original survey was improper and that 3 parcels within the lease boundary are already claimed under prior homestead filings." He watched Holt take the paper. "His lawyer sent a survey crew out last week," he says, "to document the discrepancy." Holt read the wire. He read it again. "These homestead filings. When were they made?" "According to the complaint, 18 months ago. After the Amaya lease was filed." 3 months after. Holt folded the paper and put it in his coat pocket. He thought about survey stakes driven inside a legal lease line. He thought about a man who went to look at those stakes and turned up in a cottonwood tree 6 days later with his hands tied and his boots gone. He thought about the particular gap between a formal legal complaint and a new rope. "The homestead filers," he said. "The Santa Fe office, do they have names? I sent a wire asking an hour ago. Waiting on the answer." Garza spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet and precise. "Sheriff, the Prescott boy is here. Says there's trouble at the Amaya water right on the lower bench. Someone cut the pipe." Rivas looked at Holt. The look said, "This is what every day looks like." Holt nodded at him, and Rivas turned and went with Garza at a walk that wanted to be faster and wasn't allowing it. Holt untied the mare. He looked down the street at the land office, which showed nothing through its window. He looked at the feed store, where the two men had resumed talking, but were talking the way men talk when they are talking about something other than what they appear to be talking about. He felt the folded wire in his coat pocket without taking it out. 18 months ago. 3 months after the Amaya lease was filed. 3 homestead claims, buried in the Santa Fe office's backlog, surfacing now through Drummond's lawyer, exactly when Drummond needed a legal argument to replace the illegal ones that had produced 3 dead men. It was tidy. Tidier than Cruz. Tidier than new rope and bare feet. It required someone who understood land law and had access to the filing system, and did not mind building a strategy on a foundation of manufactured paperwork and dead sheepherders. Drummond was capable of the money. Holt was not certain he was capable of this much precision. He mounted up and started north toward the bench road. The sun was fully committed now, the shadows short and hard-edged on the caliche. Behind him, the town of Arroyo Seco went back to the business of not mentioning what everyone knew, which was the same business it had been conducting for 2 years, the business that 3 dead men had not yet been enough to interrupt. He was a quarter-mile out when he looked up toward the bench switchbacks and saw Pilar Amaya on horseback at the first turn waiting for him, still as a post. She had gotten her horse from somewhere and ridden ahead while he was standing at the mare reading the wire. He hadn't seen her pass. He rode. When he was 200 yards from the switchbacks, she turned and started up without waiting for him, and he put the mare to a jog to close the distance before she was fully around the second bend and out of sight. And he was watching her back and the switchback above her, and the long line of the CAPROCK rim above that, when the rifle cracked from somewhere up in the broken limestone, and the bullet cut through the left sleeve of his coat between the elbow and the shoulder with the hot, intimate nearness of something that had been aimed rather than warned. He was off the mare in the same motion, behind a limestone outcrop at the roadside, his rifle out of the scabbard, watching the rim. The mare trotted forward 15 feet, and stopped and turned and regarded him with the expression of a horse who has run out of surprise. Nothing moved on the rim. The hawk that had been quartering the thermals above it was gone. The grass along the bench road stood in the windless heat without expression. No second shot. Pilar Amaya had not moved. She sat her horse on the switchback and watched him from 30 yards above with her head level and her hands quiet on the reins. "Whoever fired that is gone now," she called down. Her voice was even, the same tone a person might use to note a change in the weather. "He was on the rim for 20 minutes before you rode into range. You watched him." "I watched the rim. Every day." She said it as if this were a normal description of how a person spends her time, which for her, Holt understood it was. "Come up. My father is expecting you. And Marshal," she paused without looking back, the words falling down to him clear and flat, "bring your rifle." People who watch from that rim don't usually just watch. She went around the bend. Holt looked up at the empty rim for another 10 seconds. He checked his coat sleeve, clean through 2 holes, a half-inch of open air between the fabric and his skin. He looked back down the bench road, at the empty country stretching south to the smear of Arroyo Seco in the heat shimmer. He thought about a man in a cottonwood tree. He thought about survey stakes driven in secret. He thought about the land office wire in his coat pocket, and the 3 homestead filings that arrived in Santa Fe 3 months too late, to be honest. He caught the mare, put his foot in the stirrup. Below in town, through the still hot air, he heard the bell above the telegraph office begin to ring, short, urgent, the sound of an answer arriving from Santa Fe, and he stopped with one hand on the pommel and looked back, and watched Rivas come out of the sheriff's office at a dead run toward the telegraph window, which was not the way a man moves when the news is ordinary. Holt looked at the switchback above him, where Pilar had disappeared. He looked at the telegraph office below. He made his decision, swung up, and turned the mare back toward town at a hard lope. And whatever Pilar and Amaya thought about that, she would think it from the bench. And he would explain it when he got up there, assuming what was coming out of that telegraph window didn't change everything he thought he knew about who was running this particular piece of the country and why. Chapter 3. The telegraph operator was a thin young man named Birch, who wore his hair parted with the precision of someone who believed small forms of order were worth maintaining. He had the wire on the counter before Rivas reached the window, and Rivas had it read and folded by the time Holt dismounted at the rail. Names came back from Santa Fe, Rivas said. He did not hand the wire over immediately. Men who had been carrying a badge long enough developed an instinct for framing bad news, for giving it a breath of air before it landed on someone. The 3 homestead filings against the Amaya lease. Santa Fe pulled the original paperwork. He looked at Holt. All 3 claimants are real people. One's a laborer in El Paso. One works a freight outfit in Albuquerque. Third one's a widow in Taos, who hasn't left that county in 11 years. Holt took the wire and read it. None of them filed anything, he said. According to Santa Fe, they all did. Signed affidavits, proper survey references, the legal language exactly right. Rivas watched him. Somebody found 3 real names attached to old dormant land claims. Somebody who knew how to search the territorial archives and knew what they were looking for, and knew how to dress it up so it passed a desk review. Drummond. Rivas was quiet a moment. Drummond's lawyer is a man named Pell out of Las Cruces. Competent. Does cattle work, grazing disputes, water rights. He could have put this together. He paused again. But I've dealt with Pell on 2 other matters, and he's a careful man, cautious. The kind of lawyer who checks which direction the wind is blowing before he takes a step. This kind of filing, fraudulent affidavits, manufactured claims, this is not Pell's risk appetite. So either Pell doesn't know what he submitted, or somebody handed him documents he believed were genuine. Or there's a second lawyer. Holt folded the wire and put it in his pocket alongside the first one. 2 pieces of paper that together said the same thing. Someone behind Drummond had been working this range for over a year with patience and legal sophistication, and had killed at least 3 men to protect the work. He looked down the empty main street toward the north end of town, where the bench road disappeared into the heat shimmer. I need to ride out to the anchor, he said. Rivas looked at him with the expression of a man measuring a drop. That's 12 armed men, and a wounded rancher and Cruz who's been itching for a reason since this morning. I know. I'll come with you. Garza too. Not yet. Holt took the mare's reins. A federal marshal rides in alone with a badge, that's a conversation. 3 of us ride in together, that's a siege. Keep Garza on the water pipe, situation on the bench. I want the Amayas to know someone's there. He put his foot in the stirrup. If I'm not back by dark, then come. Rivas looked at him for a long moment. You're going to ask Drummond about the filings. I'm going to ask him about everything. He's been shot 3 times. He may not be receiving visitors. Then he can tell me that himself. He rode north out of Arroyo Seco and turned west at the split in the bench road, where a burned board nailed to a post bore the word anchor in letters that had been painted large and had not been touched up since. The road west ran straight across 3 miles of grama grass before it dropped into a shallow arroyo and climbed out the other side toward a cluster of buildings set against a long ridge of red sandstone that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back orange and bronze. The main house was adobe, thick-walled, built to last by someone who understood that the country did not give comfort freely, and that shelter was a thing you committed to. The outbuildings ranged behind it in a loose functional order: a barn, a bunkhouse, a forge, 2 stock tanks, a series of holding pens along the arroyo bank. The whole operation had the look of 20 years of deliberate work, which was what it was. There were men on the roof of the bunkhouse. Holt counted 2 before he crossed the arroyo, counted a 3rd at the corner of the barn before he reached the gate, and noted the 4th in the shadow of the forge doorway by the quality of the stillness there, the stillness of someone making a decision about whether to be visible. He rode in at a walk with his hands loose and in view, and his rifle in the scabbard, and his badge on his coat lapel where the afternoon light would find it. The gate was closed. A man stood at it who was not Cruz, younger, 25 or so, with a lean, hungry look, and a Winchester he was carrying at a port-arms angle that was either careless or had been practiced to look careless. He looked at the badge and did not open the gate. "Marshal wants to come through," Holt said. "Not a request. A notification." The young man looked at the badge again, looked up at the main house, looked back at Holt. "Mr. Drummond's not well." "I heard that." "Open the gate." A pause. The gate opened. Silas Drummond was in his bed in the main room of the house, propped against the headboard with 2 pillows behind him, and a look on his face that said the pillows were not his idea. He was perhaps 60, big through the chest and shoulders in the way of men who worked hard for 30 years and then stopped but kept the frame, with a gray beard cut close and hands like the roots of a cottonwood tree. The wound was in his left side. 3 bullets, Rivas had said, but a man sitting up and receiving visitors with that expression had survived worse than what was currently troubling him or believed he had, which in Holt's experience came to about the same thing. The room itself said more than the man in it, at first. A rifle over the mantel, a good one, cleaned recently. Books on a shelf beside the window, not for show. The spines were cracked and some were stacked flat, the way books end up when they've been read more than once. A woman's portrait on the wall above the fireplace, oil paint. The frame going dusty at the top, which meant she'd been gone long enough that the daily attention of grief had faded into the permanent background of it. Cruz stood at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had been told to let the marshal through, and was allowing the instruction to override his instincts, but narrowly. "Mr. Drummond," Holt said. "I'm Marshal Cade Holt, out of the Wichita office. I came into your county this morning with a dead sheepherder named Areola over my horse. I'd like to talk about that." Drummond looked at him with the careful eyes of a man in pain who had not let the pain make him stupid. "Sit down," he said. His voice was a rancher's voice, shaped by years of speaking across distances in all kinds of weather. He nodded at the chair beside the window, the one facing the bed squarely, and Holt sat in it and put his hat on his knee. "Cruz," Drummond said. "Sir." "Get out." Cruz's arms uncrossed. He looked at Holt with a look that was not a threat and was not a threat. Then he went out and pulled the door mostly closed behind him, which meant he was on the other side of it. Holt noted this and let it sit. Drummond shifted against the pillows. A brief tightening around the eyes that he allowed himself and then dismissed. Areola, he said. I don't know that name. He worked for the Amaya flock on the upper bench. Then I wouldn't know him. New rope. Hands bound. 4 horses, anchor shoes from the track width and the gait pattern. Holt kept his voice even. He's the 3rd Amaya hand dead in 6 weeks. The other 2 were ruled accidental. Something moved through Drummond's face. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. The expression of a man who has given instructions and is now calculating what instructions might have been taken further than he gave them. He looked at the window for a moment. Outside in the yard, a horse shifted and blew. I did not order any man hanged, Drummond said. He said it flatly, without decoration, the way a man says something he needs to be on record as having said. All right. You believe me. It was not quite a question. I believe you believe it. Drummond's jaw worked once. That's not the same thing. No. It's not. Holt looked at him steadily. A man who gives orders to men like Cruz, and then doesn't ask what those orders produced. That's a particular kind of decision. A man can make that decision and still be telling the truth when he says he didn't order a hanging. The question is whether the truth is enough. The room was quiet. Outside a gate hinge complained once and was still. What do you want from me, Marshal? Right now, I want to know about a man named Pollard. Drifter, currently in Sheriff Rivas's jail. He says he witnessed a Basque man running from your property at dusk on the evening you were shot. Drummond went very still. Not the stillness of a man caught, the stillness of a man who has just heard a name that means something and is deciding how much of what it means to show. I don't know anyone named Pollard, he said. He said it, looking directly at Holt, which was either the confidence of the truthful or the practiced steadiness of someone who had decided in advance what he was going to say. His eyes said something different. They said, that name is not new to me. They said it, in the involuntary language of the eyes that most people never learn to control no matter how well they manage their voices, and Holt catalogued it without comment and moved on. 3 homestead filings against your lease complaint on the Amaya property, he said. All 3 claimants are real people who filed nothing. Somebody in Santa Fe assembled those affidavits from archived names and old dormant claims. Your lawyers submit those. Drummond's expression shifted. What it shifted into was not what Holt expected, which was defensiveness. What it shifted into was confusion, and then something that looked like the beginning of anger, aimed at a target that was not in the room. Pell submitted what I asked him to submit, he said slowly. I gave him the survey documentation and the prior claim evidence that I was provided. Provided by who? A pause. Drummond looked at his hands. A land agent. Came to me 8 months ago with the information that the Amaya survey had errors and that there were existing claims that superseded it. Said he'd done the research himself. He looked up. He had documentation. Looked legitimate. This land agent have a name. Vasquez. Reyes Vasquez. Said he worked out of Las Vegas, New Mexico. Holt wrote nothing down. He had a memory that worked like a land office ledger. Things went in and stayed where he put them. He sat with the name for a moment and felt the shape of something that had been building since the cottonwood grove that morning begin to acquire structure. Vasquez. He did not know that name. He knew the description that Pilar Amaya had given him on the main street. Careful, well-dressed, clean boots, a scar along the jawline. And he did not yet have a name to hang on it, but the description and the name were beginning to inhabit the same space in his thinking, and he did not like what that space was starting to look like. "Describe him," Holt said. Drummond described a man who was careful and well-dressed, who had clean boots, who spoke with a precision that Drummond had taken at the time for education, and was now looking at the marshal's face, beginning to reassess. Holt stood, put on his hat. "You'll want to contact Pell and tell him to stop advancing the homestead complaint until you've had a conversation about the provenance of the documents he submitted. That's my recommendation." He moved toward the door. "One more thing. Pull Cruz back from the bench road. Whatever he's been authorized to do up there, unauthorized it." Drummond looked at him with the complicated expression of a powerful man being told what to do in his own house by a guest he hadn't invited and couldn't remove. The expression lasted 3 seconds. Then something in him, some piece of the machinery that had been running on arrogance and proximity to Cruz's usefulness, made a sound like a gear stripping. "All right," Drummond said. It was 2 words. It carried the weight of something larger. Cruz was in the yard when Holt came out. He was not pretending to be doing something else. He stood in the open ground between the house and the barn with his thumbs in his belt and the Winchester leaning against the fence post behind him, and the afternoon light flat on his face, and he watched Holt come down the porch steps with the patient, territorial attention of a dog that has been told not to bite and is reconsidering the instruction. "Get what you came for?" Cruz said. "More or less." Holt kept walking toward the mare at the rail. "Drummond tell you to back off?" "Drummond told me what he told me." Cruz moved to put himself between Holt and the mare, not blocking the path exactly, but occupying enough of it that the path required acknowledgement. He was a big man, and he understood how to use the fact of his size without doing anything that could be named. "I'm going to tell you something, Marshal, that I think you need to hear as a professional courtesy." His voice had gone to the pleasantness again, the pleasantness that was the top layer of something denser. "This range war has been running 2 years. The lines are set. The people on this range understand those lines, and they understand what happens when the lines get crossed. What they do not understand is a federal marshal who rode in this morning with one of the Amayas' dead men and is now sitting in Silas Drummond's bedroom asking questions that are not his jurisdiction." "Murder's my jurisdiction," Holt said. "Accident. 3 of them. It's hard country." Cruz smiled. It was a smile that had never been anywhere near his eyes. "My advice, as one professional to another, is that you point yourself south and find this foy you're supposed to be after, and leave the affairs of this particular basin to the people who live and work in it." Holt looked at him for a moment. He had a method with men like Cruz, which was to let them finish and then say the next thing without any of the weight of what they'd said attached to it, so that the weight landed back on them. "You know a man named Vasquez," he said. "Reyes Vasquez. Land agent, Las Vegas, New Mexico." Something happened in Cruz's face. It was small and fast and controlled, but it was there. A microsecond of rearrangement, the expression of a man who has just heard something from an unexpected direction. "No," Cruz said. "All right." Holt went around him to the mare. He untied the reins and was gathering them to mount when Cruz spoke again from behind him. "You're going to the Amaya camp." "That's right." "I'd advise against it." Holt put his foot in the stirrup and turned to look at Cruz over his shoulder. "I'd advise against advising me," he said, and swung up. He put the mare east across the yard at a jog, through the gate, down the road toward the Arroyo crossing. He did not look back at the anchor. He had what he came for: Drummond's genuine confusion about the homestead documents, the name Vasquez, and the clear picture of a man who had built his operation on 20 years of uncontested authority and was now beginning to understand that the ground beneath it had been moved while he wasn't watching. That understanding was going to work on Drummond over the next 12 hours, and it was going to produce something. Whether that something was useful or dangerous, he would find out. He also had the image of Cruz's face at the name Vasquez. That image he kept at the front of his thinking, the way you keep a lit match at the front of a dark room. The bench road climbed the switchbacks in long traverses cut into the CAPROCK face, and the mare took them at a steady walk, her hooves careful on the loose limestone shale, her ears forward in the attentive way that meant she was thinking about something she couldn't yet see. The afternoon had gone golden and still, the heat beginning its slow retreat from the rock faces. Below and behind him the Cimarron Basin spread wide and flat, the grass silver-green in the long light, the anchor buildings small and geometric at the base of the red ridge. He was 200 yards below the bench rim when Enrique Amaya appeared at the top of the switchback and sat his horse and watched him come. He was younger than Holt had expected from Rivas's description, or rather he was exactly the age Rivas had said, 27, but he carried the age differently than most men do at 27, with a settled quality usually earned over more years. He wore a decent coat that had been decent longer ago than recently, and he held a rolled paper in his left hand that he did not put away. Marshal Holt. His English was clear and precise, the English of someone educated in it rather than born to it, with the particular care for the language that people who learn it formally sometimes have and native speakers have largely abandoned. "My sister said you'd be coming. She also said you turned back toward town." Not an accusation. An observation, offered the way a man offers an observation when he would like an explanation but has too much discipline to ask for one directly. "Telegraph from Santa Fe," Holt said. He dismounted and walked the mare the last 30 yards up to the rim. "The homestead filings against your lease. The claimants are real people who filed nothing. Somebody manufactured the affidavits." Enrique received this without visible surprise, which meant it confirmed something he had already suspected. He unrolled the paper in his hand. It was a map, hand-drawn in pencil on survey paper, precise and detailed, the bench, the lease boundary, the CAPROCK edge, and within the lease boundary 2 X marks in the draw below the east rim. "That is where Areola found the stakes," Enrique said. He pointed to the marks. 9 days ago. Here and here, in the drainage below the east drop. We pulled 2 of them. The others we left, because we wanted a witness before we touched them." He looked up. "Areola went back 6 days ago, to show Deputy Garza." "I know." "He did not come back." Enrique rolled the map and held it out. Holt took it. The company name on the stakes was Mesa Meridian. I looked for that name in the Santa Fe filings. There is a Mesa Meridian land and cattle company registered in the territory 8 months ago. I could not find the principals. The agent of record is a man named Vasquez. Holt looked at him. "I know that name means something to you," Enrique said. "My sister described the man who brought my father the purchase offer 3 weeks ago. The man who said he represented interested buyers and made a generous offer for our lease. My father declined." He paused. 10 days later, Yaregui was found drowned. "Describe the man." Enrique described the same man Drummond had described. Careful. Well-dressed. Clean boots. A scar along the jaw, left side, running from the ear toward the chin at a slight diagonal. The kind of scar that a knife makes when the man holding the knife knows what he's doing. Holt stood with the map in his hand and looked out across the bench to the east CAPROCK rim, 400 yards of open grass, and then the broken limestone edge above the draw. The afternoon light was going amber now. In the draw below the rim, if you knew where to look, you could make out the disturbance of pulled stakes in the pale caliche soil. "Your father," Holt said. "I need to speak with him. He is at the camp. He is expecting you." Enrique looked at him with the careful, level gaze that Holt was beginning to recognize as a family trait. "What are you going to do, Marshal?" It was the question a man asks when he has been waiting for someone to ask it of for a long time and has stopped believing anyone would. Holt considered his answer the way he considered most things, not long but completely. "I'm going to find out who Vasquez is and who he's working for and what they want with this range. And then I'm going to arrest whoever killed your men." Enrique looked at him for a moment. "That is the right answer," he said. It was not a compliment. It was a calibration. Whether it is the true one, we will see. He turned his horse toward the camp. "Come." The Amaya camp occupied a shallow bowl of ground on the upper bench where a spring surfaced through the limestone and fed a tank that the family had improved with flat stone and mortar. The sheep were on the far meadow, attended by 3 dogs and a young herder who moved among them with the unhurried expertise of someone who had been doing this since he was old enough to hold a staff. 2 canvas tents, large and well-maintained, and a stone fire ring with a low cooking fire going despite the heat, because cooking fires don't wait for weather. Tomas Amaya sat on a low wooden stool beside the fire. He was not a large man, but he had the dense quality of something compressed by years of hard use. Short, heavy through the forearms and shoulders, his hands folded in his lap with the careful deliberateness of a man whose knuckle joints had opinions about their position. His face was a map of the Pyrenees and 40 years of New Mexico. Dark, creased deep at the eyes and the corners of the mouth, with the particular weathering that comes from watching sheep in every condition the sky can produce. He looked at Holt with the black eyes of a man who had outlasted several things he was not supposed to outlast, and had decided some time ago that surprise was a luxury. He did not stand. "Marshal," he said. His English was unaccented and exact, which was not what Holt had expected from Rivas's description, and the slight smile that crossed the old man's face told Holt that this discrepancy was intentional and that Tomas Amaya enjoyed it. "Mr. Amaya." Holt took the offered stool and sat across the fire from him. Pilar appeared from inside the larger tent with 2 cups and set them down without ceremony, and stood at the tent entrance with her arms at her sides and her eyes on Holt. Enrique leaned against the stone tank and said nothing. "Areola," Tomas said. He looked at the fire. "He came to me from Mora County when Enrique was a boy. He knew sheep the way some men know horses, not as animals to be managed but as things to be understood. He was a good man. He was quiet a moment. He did not deserve the tree." "No," Holt said. "He didn't." The old man looked up at him. "You have been to the Anchor?" "Yes." "And Drummond?" "Yes." Tomas considered this. "Drummond is a hard man and an arrogant one, and he has done us real harm. But I have never believed Drummond was the whole of it." He looked at the fire again. "A man who wants your land sends lawyers. A man who wants to destroy you, to break your family and scatter your flock and take what you built, that man sends different things." He spread his arthritic hands. "Drummond sent lawyers and he sent Cruz. But what came to us 3 weeks ago with a polite offer and clean boots, that was something that did not come from Drummond." "The man who called himself Vasquez," Holt said. Tomas nodded. "I told him no. I told him this in English, so there would be no confusion. He was polite about the refusal, He said he understood, that the offer would remain open, that he hoped I would reconsider. The old man looked at his hands. Yaregui was found 10 days later. Then Murin. Then Areola. He lifted his eyes to Holt. I am not a man who frightens easily, Marshal. I came from a place where the winters could kill you, and the neighbors sometimes did, and the government of 2 countries told you did not exist. This country does not frighten me. He paused. But I am a man who counts. 3 men. 3 men I knew. 3 men my children knew. 3 men who believed that working for the Amaya family was safe work because the Amaya family had a legal lease and a right to this bench. The fire popped once in the quiet. I'm going to find Vasquez, Holt said. The man behind him, too. Whoever funded Mesa Meridian and put those fraudulent filings in front of Drummond's lawyer. I need you to trust me, to work that without doing anything on this bench that gives anyone a legal reason to remove you. Tomas looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Pilar, and some communication passed between them that had no words. Pilar's chin moved slightly. Not a nod, something smaller than a nod, the microscopic signal of 2 people who have been reading each other for a lifetime. The old man looked back at Holt. 1 week, Tomas said. I will give you 1 week before I write a letter to every newspaper in the territory. 1 week should be enough. It will have to be. Holt rode back down the switchbacks in the last of the evening light, the sky behind him going orange and violet above the CAPROCK edge, and the bench grass dark below it. The basin ahead ran to shadows. A coyote crossed the bench road 50 yards below him and didn't bother to hurry. He was thinking about the scar. The knife scar along the jaw. He was certain he had seen it before, and certain the man who carried it was not named Vasquez and had not previously represented himself as a land agent. The memory was 3 years old, and placed the man in a different context entirely, and the context was making Holt recalibrate everything he thought he understood about what was happening on this range and why. He was coming around the 3rd switchback above the bench road when he heard the horses below him. 3 of them, moving fast up the road from the direction of town, which was wrong because Rivas had said he would come at dark, and it was not yet dark. Holt pulled the mare up against the CAPROCK face and waited in the shadow of the overhang and watched the riders come around the bend below him and resolve in the dim light into Cruz and 2 anchor hands, and the 3 of them pulled up at the base of the switchbacks, and Cruz looked up toward the bench and did not see Holt in the shadow above him. He'll be coming down, Cruz said. He said it to the men with him, not to Holt. Wait for him below the 2nd bend. Don't draw unless he draws. Just block the road and tell him the message. What message? One of the hands said. That this county has handled its own affairs for 20 years and doesn't require federal assistance. Cruz's voice was entirely flat. The pleasantness was gone. And that a man who keeps asking questions about things that are none of his concern can find the questions answered in ways he won't like. Holt stepped the mare out of the shadow and let her hooves ring on the limestone, and the 3 men below heard it and looked up. Cruz, he said. His voice came down the switchback clean and level in the still evening air. I heard that. There was a moment, a specific moment that exists between a warning and what comes after a warning. And then Cruz made a decision. His hand came off his saddle horn. His horse moved. The 2 hands with him spread left and right on the road below the switchback with the practiced lateral movement of men who had rehearsed this configuration, which meant they had done it before, and it had worked before. And in the same second that they spread, Holt was off the mare and coming down the switchback on foot at a run, because the high ground meant nothing if he was on horseback on a narrow trail with 2 armed men at the base of it. He hit the flat ground running and went straight at Cruz. What followed occupied perhaps 45 seconds and was not elegant. Cruz was a big man who knew how to fight and had the specific advantage of not being surprised by what was happening. And the first exchange of it, Cruz off his horse and swinging before Holt had fully closed the distance, connected with the left side of Holt's jaw and sent white light across his vision and drove him back 2 steps before he caught his balance on the caliche. The 2 hands had dismounted. One of them was behind him. Holt turned his hip into the grab from behind and drove his elbow back into the man's ribs with enough force to hear something give, and the man made a sound and went to one knee, and Holt turned back to Cruz and they went at it in earnest. MacDonald would have described it without mercy, and that is how it deserves to be described. The specific pain of a knuckle connecting with a cheekbone, a sound like green wood snapping, the grinding weight of a man Cruz's size when he got a hold and used his body as a lever, the taste of blood from the split inside of a lip and the way it sharpens things, the way the world contracts to the next 2 seconds. Holt was smaller but faster and had the specific advantage of a man who fights without anger, which is a considerable advantage because anger is weight and weight is slow. He got Cruz down. Cruz went to the caliche on one knee and then both, and Holt was on him with one arm locked and Cruz's face in the dirt, and the second hand, the one whose ribs were intact, had his pistol out and was pointing it at Holt's back from 8 feet away and was very still. The one with the damaged ribs was still on one knee making careful inventory of the damage. Holt held Cruz, caught his breath, did not look at the pistol behind him because looking at it would not change its position and would change his own position in ways he couldn't afford. "Cruz," he said, "you're going to tell your man to put that away." Cruz said something into the caliche that was not agreement. "Cruz." "Harlan," Cruz said. His voice was compressed and thickened. "Holster it." A pause. A sound of leather. Holt stood, stepped back, let Cruz get up in his own time, which took a moment. Cruz came to his feet and stood breathing hard and looking at Holt with an expression that had worked its way through fury and come out the other side into something colder and more deliberate. "You are going to regret this," Cruz said. "You ambushed a federal marshal," Holt said. "That's a federal charge. I could arrest all 3 of you right now." He looked at each of them in turn. "Instead, I'm going to tell you to ride back to the anchor and tell Drummond what you did tonight. All of it. What you said, and what you tried and how it ended. You tell him the marshal heard the whole thing before you knew he was there." He picked up his hat from the caliche. "Drummond wants to keep this county from falling into something that doesn't end well for him. You are not helping him do that." Cruz looked at him. The cold, deliberate thing was still in his expression. "Ride back," he said to the 2 hands. He got on his horse and turned the blood bay without looking at Holt again and rode back toward the anchor at a walk. The 2 hands followed. Harlan, the one with the pistol, turned in the saddle once to look back. Holt looked back at him, and Harlan turned forward again. Holt watched them go. Dust on the road behind them, blue in the evening light. He found the mare 20 yards back up the switchback where she had stopped, and was watching the proceedings with the resigned patience of a horse whose owner creates more work than he needs to. He mounted up and started for town. His jaw ached, in the specific localized way of a jaw that has been hit hard and is filing its complaint. His lip had stopped bleeding. In the last of the light, the basin opened ahead of him, vast and still, the lights of Arroyo Seco beginning to appear as small orange points in the darkening distance, the smell of the cooled grass coming up from the bench as the temperature dropped. He was thinking about Vasquez and the scar, and the 3-year-old memory that would not fully surface, and the shape that was assembling itself from the survey stakes, and the dead men, and the fraudulent filings and Cruz's face at the name, when he rode around the last bend above the flat, and found Sheriff Rivas sitting his horse in the middle of the road with a lantern held up, and his face the color of caliche in the lantern's light. "Second wire came in from Santa Fe," Rivas said. He lowered the lantern. "Mesa Meridian." I asked for the full registration record. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. He held it out, and Holt took it and opened it against his saddle and held it up to the lantern. He read it. "This man Vasquez," Rivas said quietly. "The agent of record for Mesa Meridian." Santa Fe pulled his territorial identification. He filed it 14 months ago under the name Vasquez. He paused, but the clerk who processed it flagged it at the time and noted that the physical description on the identification matched a man with a prior filing under a different name from 8 years back. A land speculator out of Texas. He watched Holt read. "The name on the prior filing," Rivas said, "is Reyes Kota." Holt went still with the paper in his hands. Reyes Kota. He had put Reyes Kota in a jail in Abilene, Texas, 3 years ago on a land fraud charge that had not held because the witness recanted and the county judge had a business relationship with one of Kota's principals that nobody proved but everybody knew about. Kota had walked. He had looked at Holt across the courtroom when the verdict came back, and what was in the look was not relief and was not triumph. It was the specific expression of a man taking a long, accurate measurement of his opponent and filing it away. And now the man was here. Had been here for over a year. Had been building something in this basin with the patience of someone who had been given 18 months he hadn't expected and had used them well. Holt folded the paper and looked up. The lantern threw orange light across Rivas's face and the horses and the empty dark road beyond them. The coyote called from somewhere on the flat once and was quiet. "He knows I'm here," Holt said. How could he know that? Because the shot on the bench road this morning was not a warning shot. He looked at the dark country around them, feeling the specific awareness of a man who has just understood that the ground he's standing on has been studied. It was a ranging shot. He was checking the distance. Rivas was quiet for a moment. "Then, where do we find him?" "I don't know yet. But he'll find me first." Holt touched the mare forward toward town. "Send a wire to Wichita tonight. Tell them I need everything the federal office has on Reyes Kota, land fraud and anything else. Tell them it's urgent." They rode toward the lights of Arroyo Seco, through the full dark. The bench road was a gray line in the starlight. Somewhere behind them, on the rim above the switchbacks, something moved in the broken limestone that was too heavy for a coyote and too deliberate to be wind, and Holt heard it and did not look back because looking back was what the sound was designed to make him do. He rode on. He had gone 400 yards when the sound came again, closer this time, from the east side of the road where the CAPROCK dropped off into the draw, and it was followed by a single sharp whistle, the kind that carries a message between men who have arranged a code, and then silence. "Ride," Holt said. He put the mare to a lope, and Rivas came with him, and they covered the last mile to the edge of town at a pace that did not invite discussion, and when the first buildings rose up around them, Holt pulled the mare to a walk and looked back at the empty road behind them. Nothing. The road ran back into the dark and showed him nothing, and he turned forward and rode into the lamplight of Arroyo Seco and past the darkened land office where Enrique Amaya had gone back inside without saying what his face had said, and he was almost to the sheriff's office when he saw the figure. At the far end of the street, where the main road left town to the south, and the lamplight ran out and the dark began, a man stood still. He was well dressed. His boots caught the last of the light from the nearest lamp. He stood with the specific stillness of someone who had been watching the street long enough to be comfortable in it. And when Holt's eyes found him across 200 feet of packed caliche, the man raised one hand in a gesture that was not quite a greeting and was not quite anything else. The scar along his jaw was visible even at that distance, or Holt told himself it was, which might have been the same thing. Holt's hand dropped toward his holster, and the man turned and walked unhurried into the dark at the end of the street. And Holt put the mare forward at a run, and Rivas shouted something behind him, and he reached the end of the lamplight, and the dark came up all at once, complete, the desert dark that has no gradient, and the man was gone. He sat the mare at the edge of the dark and listened. Boot heels on caliche, fading, around the back of a building he couldn't see. Then nothing. Then only the mare's breathing, and the dry tick of cooling adobe, and somewhere up the street a dog that had started too late. Holt looked at the dark for a long moment. Then he turned the mare and rode back toward the sheriff's office at a walk, because running after a man in full dark in unfamiliar country was how you got shot from cover, and Reyes Kota had already shown tonight that he understood angles. Rivas caught up with him at the rail. "Kota," he said. "Kota. You're certain?" "I am now." Holt dismounted and looped the reins. He stood for a moment looking south into the dark where the road went, feeling the particular quality of being watched that a man develops a sense for after enough years in this kind of work. Not the neck-prickling animal fear of it, but the intellectual certainty of it, the knowledge that somewhere in that dark a very careful man was watching him stand at this rail and thinking about tomorrow. "We'll need to talk to your witness," Holt said. "Pollard. The man who says he saw a Basque at the anchor fence line the evening Drummond was shot. First thing in the morning. Tonight." Rivas looked at him. "It's past 9. I know what time it is." Holt turned toward the office door. Kota let himself be seen tonight, standing in the middle of the street, waiting for me to find him. That was not carelessness. That was a message. He put his hand on the door. "I want to know what Pollard's been told to say before Kota has all night to finish telling him." He went inside. The cell at the back held a man of perhaps 45, who had the lean, watchful quality of someone who had spent considerable portions of his life in small rooms making calculations about the men outside them. He was sitting on the bunk when Holt came through the door, and he had the expression of a man who had been waiting for this conversation and had decided in advance that he was ready for it. Holt pulled the desk chair to within 6 feet of the cell door and sat in it and looked at Pollard without saying anything. A minute passed. Pollard shifted on the bunk. "What?" "I'm just getting to know you," Holt said pleasantly. "Take your time." Another minute. "I already told the sheriff what I saw." "I know. I'm not the sheriff." Pollard looked at the badge, looked at Holt's face, made a calculation. "I want to know what happens to me if I change my statement." "That depends on what you change it to." "I mean, if I say I made a mistake about what I saw. I'd want to know what you actually saw instead." Pollard was quiet. He looked at the floor. He was working something out, the way a man works out the lesser of two problems, measuring each against the other on a scale that only he could read. "A man paid me," he said finally, $5 to say I'd seen a Mexican-looking man at the anchor fence line. He told me what to say, and I said it." "Describe the man who paid you." Pollard described a man who was careful and well-dressed, who had clean boots, a scar along the jaw. "Give me the name he used." "He didn't give me one." "All right." Holt stood. You'll sign a revised statement in the morning. Everything you just told me. What happens to me? If the statement holds and you testify when the time comes, I'll tell the judge you cooperated. He moved toward the door. If the statement doesn't hold, if somebody gets to you between now and then, I'll tell the judge something different. Nobody's going to get to me, Pollard said. I'm in a cell. Holt looked at him for a moment. Make sure it stays locked, he said. That's not something I say to every prisoner. He went back into the main office. Rivas was at the window, looking out at the empty street. The lamps were still burning, the street still empty, the dark at the south end of town showing nothing. Wire went to Wichita, Rivas said without turning. Garza assented before he rode up to the bench. Good. Do you want to tell me what Kota is? What he is, Holt said. He stood at the other side of the window and looked at the same empty street. He's the kind of man who takes the long view on things, who builds from the ground up, and does it in a way that by the time anyone understands what he's built, the building is mostly done. He thought about the Abilene courtroom, the look across the room when the verdict came back. He's been on this range for over a year. He inflamed Drummond against the Amayas and let the anchor do the dirty work of driving them off. When that didn't work, he manufactured legal grounds to void the Amaya lease. When that wasn't enough, he killed 3 men to break the family's nerve. He paused. And he shot Drummond and paid Pilar to put a Basque man at the scene, because when the legal complaints cleared and the Amayas were gone and Drummond was in a territorial prison, Mesa Meridian was going to file on this entire basin, and Kota was going to run the best grass range in this part of New Mexico under whatever name he chose next. Rivas was quiet for a long moment. The range war was never between Drummond and the Amayas. No. They were the scenery. The war was always Kota's, and neither side knew they were fighting it. Outside, a lamp on the far side of the street guttered once and held. A dog went quiet somewhere. The night settled into its full weight over Arroyo Seco. I'm going to arrest him, Holt said. Tomorrow. I need a day to build the case tight enough that it doesn't slide out from under me the way it did in Abilene. He turned from the window. Get me everything the county has on Mesa Meridian, the survey crew, anyone who's seen Vasquez or Kota in this area, and find out who the other 2 anchor hands were that night in the cottonwood grove, because somebody with a bad left boot was there when Ariola died, and I want that man's name. I'll start tonight, Rivas said. I'll be at the hotel. Holt put on his hat. He was tired, in the flat, functional way of a man who had been up since before dawn, and had been shot at, and had fought 3 men on a switchback, and had finished the day looking at Reyes Kota's back disappearing into the dark, and he was not going to let any of that matter until he had slept. He opened the door. Outside, the bench road ran north in the starlight toward the CAPROCK and the Amaya camp, and whatever Pilar, Amaya thought of a federal marshal, who had turned back toward town instead of coming up to meet her father as promised. He made a note to explain that in the morning. He was halfway out the door when Rivas said his name. Garza's up on the bench with the Amayas tonight, Rivas said. He was going to ride back down after the water pipe situation. I told him to stay. He looked at Holt. I had a feeling. Good feeling, Holt said. He went out into the night and crossed the street to the hotel and went up the stairs to the 2nd floor and the room at the end that faced north, from which he could see the bench road running out of town into the dark, and the distant pale line of the CAPROCK, and above it a sky so dense with stars it looked structural, like something weight-bearing, like the ceiling of a thing older than everything below it. He sat on the edge of the bed with his coat on and his boots on, and thought about Reyes Kota standing at the end of the street raising one hand, and he thought about that gesture for a long time. It was not a greeting. It was not a taunt. It was an invitation. "Come find me," it said. "I have been here longer than you, and I know this ground, and I am ready." Holt lay back on the bed, and put his hat over his face, and was asleep in 4 minutes, which was about right for a man who intended to be ready by morning. He had been asleep for perhaps 2 hours when the sound brought him up. Not the sound itself, but the silence after it, the specific quality of a silence that has had something removed from it. He was off the bed, and at the window before he was fully awake, hat off, looking down at the bench road. The road was empty. The street lamps burned. The dark at the south end of town was the same dark. Except the lamp above the door of the sheriff's office was out. It had been burning when he crossed the street 2 hours ago. He stood at the window and looked at the dark rectangle below the sheriff's sign and felt the specific cold clarity of a man who has just understood that something has begun that was not going to wait for morning. He took his rifle from beside the door and went down the stairs at a run. The sheriff's office door was not locked. He went through it low and fast and came up inside with the rifle leveled and his eyes adjusting to the dark. And what he found was Rivas behind his desk with his hands flat on the wood, not moving. And behind Rivas, in the shadows at the back of the office, a man who was not Kota stood with a pistol pressed to the back of Rivas's head. Not Kota. One of his men. A compact, watchful man, with the flat professional ease of someone who is comfortable doing this kind of work, and who now looked at Holt over Rivas's head and smiled the way men smile when they are holding the piece on the board that matters. "Put the rifle down, Marshal," the man said. His voice was unhurried. "Mr. Kota would like you to come and have a conversation." From the back of the office, from the direction of the cells, came the sound of the cell door opening. Then a second set of footsteps. Then Pollard's voice, low and ashamed, said, "I'm sorry, Marshal. He was already inside when they put me in." Holt stood in the doorway with the rifle on the man behind Rivas, and ran the geometry of the room, and did not like what it gave him. The man with the pistol was 6 feet behind Rivas, in shadow, headshot distance if Holt were going to take it, which he was not through a sheriff. He counted his options the way he counted everything, fast and completely. He had begun to lower the rifle when the back door of the office, the door that opened onto the alley that Holt had not yet confirmed existed, swung open, and a figure came through it with a shotgun, and in the lamplight from the street through the front window, Holt could see it was young Harlan from the anchor, the one whose ribs he had broken on the switchback. And Harlan's face said clearly that he remembered the switchback too, and was not disposed toward patience. Holt stood with the rifle half lowered, between 2 guns and a man behind a badge, and heard the twin hammers of Harlan's shotgun come back one after the other, each one a small, definitive sound in the quiet of the office, and looked at the young man's face, which was the face of someone 17 years old and frightened and in pain from the broken ribs, and not sure of the line between what he would and wouldn't do, and that uncertainty was the most dangerous thing in the room. Chapter 4. Holt did not look at the hammers. You look at the hammers when you are afraid of the shotgun, and being afraid of the shotgun is what Harlan needed him to be. Instead, he looked at Harlan's hands. The right hand had the trigger guard, and the left had the forestock, and both were shaking in the way that hands shake when the body is running on adrenaline and broken ribs and 17 years' worth of not quite knowing where the line is. "Harlan," Holt said. He kept his voice at the level of a man discussing something mildly inconvenient. "You did not come here to shoot a federal marshal. You broke my ribs." "I did." "You were pointing a pistol at my back." You still broke them. Yes. Holt let a breath go. And shooting me fixes that how, exactly? Harlan's jaw worked. Behind Rivas, the man with the pistol watched Holt with the detached interest of someone who is not in charge of this moment and is curious how it resolves. Rivas himself had gone very still in his chair, the practiced stillness of a man who has been in enough bad rooms to know that the one contribution he can make right now is to not add to the problem. Set the gun down, the man behind Rivas said. He was talking to Holt. Mr. Kota wants a conversation. That's all this is. If that's all it is, Holt said, why is the sheriff in his own office with a gun at his head? Insurance. Against what? The man almost smiled. Against you. Holt looked at Harlan. The boy's hands had steadied somewhat, which was either better or worse. Harlan. You ride back to the anchor tonight. You're an anchor hand who made a bad decision on a hard day. Cruz put you up to it, and Cruz answers for that, not you. You stand here one more minute holding that gun. You're looking at obstruction of a federal officer and aiding a kidnapping. He paused. You're 17 years old. Don't hand Reyes Kota your next 10 years. Harlan's eyes went to the man behind Rivas, and the man gave him nothing. That was its own kind of answer. The hammers came down one at a time. Harlan lowered the gun. Get out, Holt said. Now. Back door. Don't come back into this town tonight. He went. The back door swung, and the alley took him. The man behind Rivas had not moved the pistol. That was well done, he said, and he sounded as if he meant it. But the offer still stands. Mr. Kota would like to speak with you. He's nearby. You walk out with me now. The sheriff stays where he is, everybody has a conversation, and you go on about your evening. Where? Close. Name? The man considered. Diaz. All right, Diaz. Here is what happens. Holt set the rifle against the wall slowly, then straightened. You put the pistol away, and we all three walk out the front door together, and you take me wherever Kota is. Sheriff Rivas stays in this office, door locked, with his shotgun across his knees. He looked past Diaz at Rivas. If I'm not back in 2 hours, Sheriff, you ride for Garza on the bench and you wire Wichita. Rivas said, I don't like this. I know. 2 hours. Diaz looked at him steadily, then holstered the pistol. After you, he said. Kota had taken a room at the back of the hotel, on the ground floor, which meant a window to the alley and a door off the back corridor that he had propped open with a boot. A man who always keeps his exits in order. Holt had known this about him from Abilene, and he filed the detail alongside everything else he knew, and walked through the open door after Diaz into a room that smelled of tobacco and leather and the cedar oil that a man uses on good boots. Reyes Kota sat at the small table by the window, in a straight-backed chair, his coat on, a glass of something amber at his right hand. Up close, in lamplight, he was 45 or near it, lean and dark-complexioned, with the groomed, unhurried presentation of a man who has learned that looking as if nothing bothers him is itself a form of leverage. The scar ran along his left jaw from below the ear, an old white line that the lamplight caught along its edge. His eyes were brown, very dark, and they moved to Holt with the economical focus of a chess player looking at a board he has studied in advance. Marshal Holt. He gestured at the other chair. Sit down. I'll stand. Kota inclined his head fractionally, accepting this. He picked up the glass, turned it once, set it down. You've been busy today. It's been a full morning. Drummond. The Amaya camp. The bench road where someone shot at you. He watched Holt. That was not my instruction, for what it's worth. I gave no order to fire on a federal marshal. Good to know. Who did? Cruz has been operating with considerable independence these last weeks. A man like Cruz, once you give him room, tends to use more of it than you intended. He said it with a kind of rueful precision, as if reflecting on a management problem. I understand you've also been asking about Mesa Meridian. I have the full territorial registration, Holt said. Agent of record, Reyes Vasquez, formerly Reyes Kota, land speculator, Abilene, Texas, 1872. The clerk in Santa Fe flagged the physical description when you filed 14 months ago. It took a wire from a county sheriff to pull it. Kota smiled. It reached his eyes slightly, which was more than most of his expressions managed. Clerk Hoffman. I always wondered about that man. He tapped a finger on the table once. All right. You know who I am. Sit down, Marshal. I am not going to offer you anything except a conversation, and that is worth having. Holt sat. He put his hands flat on the table where Kota could see them, and Kota noted this and did the same. Tell me about Mesa Meridian, Holt said. Kota considered. When he spoke, it was with the cadence of a man who has prepared an argument and is now delivering the best version of it. This basin is the finest grass range in the territory. Drummond has held it for 20 years on sheer proximity and custom, and one old water agreement with the county. He's never filed a proper deed on 2/3 of it. His cattle are aging stock, no selective breeding, no rotation. Profit margins that have been declining for 8 years because he runs the operation the way his father ran it, and his father was working in a different century. He picked up the glass. The Amaya lease on the upper bench is a better use of that land. Sheep on the bench, rotated properly with dogs and management, improves the grass cover. Drummond doesn't know this because Drummond has not looked at a land science paper in his life. You're going to tell me you're an improving landlord, Holt said. I'm going to tell you I had a vision for this range that neither Drummond nor the Amayas could achieve on their own. And 3 dead herders are the vision? The glass went down. No. The dead men were not supposed to happen. Cruz took it further than my instructions. You said that already. Cruz also took the orders that sent him to the bench in the first place. Kota looked at him. You want me to say I killed them? I want to know who killed them. Cruz men. I can give you 2 names. I can give you the man with the left boot. He held Holt's eyes. I will give you those names and a signed account of what Cruz authorized, and in exchange I would like to discuss what happens to Mesa Meridian's lease filings. The room was quiet for a moment. Down the corridor, someone climbed the hotel stairs, slow and heavy-footed, and the steps faded toward the front of the building. Holt looked at Kota, and Kota looked back at him, and neither of them said anything, because what Kota had just offered was a negotiation, and Holt had not yet decided whether to negotiate. You shot Drummond, Holt said. Drummond was becoming a liability. Yes or no? A pause. Yes. And you paid Pilar to put a Basque man at the scene. The intention was to have Enrique Amaya arrested for attempted murder. With the leaseholder in custody and the family's legal position under assault on 2 fronts, Tomas would have sold. He said it cleanly, the arithmetic of it. He's a proud man, but he's not an irrational one. Except Pollard's already recanted. Something moved behind Kota's eyes. Fast and gone. He had not known that. When? Tonight. Before Diaz walked into the sheriff's office. Kota sat back in the chair. He was quiet for 10 seconds, which was a long time in a room like this. He was not panicking. A man like Kota did not panic, had excised that option from his repertoire somewhere in his 20s, but he was recalculating. And Holt could see the calculation running behind the steady brown eyes the way you can sometimes see a river through ice. "The offer I made you," Kota said finally. "It still stands. The names of the men who hanged Areola, and a full accounting of Cruz's role, in exchange for consideration on the Mesa Meridian filings." "What consideration are you looking for?" "That the filings stand. That Mesa Meridian is permitted to proceed with its lease challenge through legal channels, and that whatever charges come out of tonight's conversation do not include the land fraud count." "You're asking me to let the scheme run." "I'm asking you to let the legal process run. The homestead filings are fraudulent, yes. But the underlying argument, that the Amaya survey has errors, that the bench is underlaid by prior claims, that is worth examining. A court examines it, the Amayas keep their lawyers busy, and meanwhile the real question of this basin's best use gets settled through process rather than," he paused, "the alternative. You think I'm going to bargain a fraud charge for 3 men's names? I think you're a practical man." "Then you've been misinformed." Holt stood. "You're going to give me those names because they are the names of murderers, and you have information about murderers, and I am a federal officer asking you for it. That is the only deal there is." Kota looked up at him. The calculation was still running. "And if I decline?" "Then I arrest you tonight on the Drummond shooting, the Pollard fraud, and the Mesa Meridian filings, and I build the murder case the hard way while you sit in a cell in Arroyo Seco." He put on his hat. "Think it over. I'll come back in the morning." He turned for the door. Diaz was in the corridor, having heard all of it through the thin panel, and Holt looked at him, and Diaz moved aside. "Holt." He stopped but did not turn. "The man with the left boot is named Kasner. He rides for the Anchor. He was in the grove that night with 3 others, whose names I'll give you in the morning, along with a full statement on Cruz." A pause. "For nothing. No deal. Just the names." Now Holt turned. Kota was still in the chair, the glass still on the table, the lamplight still doing what lamplight does in a room where something has been decided. "The dead men were not part of my design," he said. His voice had shifted. The argument was gone from it. What was left was something that might have been the truth, or might have been the best approximation of truth that a man like Kota could manage. And in Holt's experience, those 2 things were not always different. "I am a great many things, Marshal. A man who orders the hanging of sheepherders is not one of them." "You put Cruz on the bench," Holt said. "That makes you responsible for what Cruz did there." Kota absorbed this. "I know," he said. Holt left him with the lamp and the glass and whatever he was going to do with knowing. Rivas had the county land records spread across his desk when Holt came back, the lamp turned up bright, his reading glasses on. He looked up and read Holt's face and said nothing for a moment. Then he talked. "Enough." Holt took his coat off and hung it on the peg by the door. "Kasner. He's one of the anchor hands. Left boot wears down on the outside of the heel. Find out which bunkhouse he sleeps in." "I know Kasner." Rivas wrote the name. "What else?" "Kota shot Drummond himself." "Admits it." "Paid Pollard $5 to put a Basque man at the scene." Holt poured water from the pitcher on the shelf, drank half of it standing. "He'll give us a full statement on Cruz in the morning. Says the hangings went beyond his instructions." "Do you believe that?" Holt considered it, the same way he had in the hotel room. "Partly. I believe he didn't order Areola killed by name. I believe he told Cruz to make the Amayas too frightened to stay, and Cruz made that mean whatever Cruz wanted it to mean. He sat across the desk from Rivas. The distinction matters in court. It doesn't bring Areola back. No, Rivas said. It doesn't. He looked at his records. Mesa Meridian. I found the original filing here in the county records, misfiled under General Survey correspondence. Somebody put it where it wouldn't be found quickly. The survey crew that drove those stakes on the Amaya lease, they came through Arroyo Seco 6 weeks ago. 3 men from Las Vegas stayed one night at the hotel under the name of a pipeline inspection company. He tapped the ledger. Hotel register. I pulled it an hour ago. Names. The lead man signed as R. Montoya. The handwriting is, he turned the register so Holt could see, not a man who signs his name the same way twice. He wrote the R differently in the first name and the M differently in the last. Holt looked at the register. The handwriting was careful, controlled, and underneath the control it was the handwriting of someone writing a name that was not his name, which produces a specific hesitation in the pen stroke at the first letter. He had seen it in forged documents before. Somebody who's used aliases long enough that he can't fully commit to the new one, he said. Same tell every time. The other 2 signed as Harmon and Reese. Both paid cash. Holt sat back. The lamp on the desk threw a warm circle across the spread records and left the edges of the room in dark. Through the front window the street was empty and still, 2 lamps burning at the far end. The bench road running north into a black that the stars above the CAPROCK did nothing to relieve. He thought about what Kota had said. The basin's best use. The improving landlord, the vision. The sheep on the bench doing what Drummond's aging cattle could not. He thought about Areola's feet, bare and pale in the cottonwood shade. He thought about Tomas Amaya's hands, ruined by 40 years of rope work, folded in his lap with that deliberate arthritic care. Tomorrow, he said. Here's what we need before I can move on Kota. The 2 names he's giving us on the Grove, plus Kasner. We need Pollard's signed statement. We need the hotel register and the Mesa Meridian County filing. We need Drummond's account of what Vasquez gave him and when. Drummond's going to lawyer up the moment he understands the shape of it. Maybe. But he's been defrauded and shot by the same man. And right now his lawyer is Pell, who submitted documents he didn't know were fraudulent and is going to be very cooperative once someone explains his exposure. He rubbed his face with both hands, the tiredness surfacing for a moment and being put back down. There's also the question of who financed Mesa Meridian. Kota's smart and he's bold, but this operation is capitalized well beyond what I saw in Abilene. Somebody has money in this. Rivas took his glasses off. I sent for the territorial incorporation papers tonight. Should have an answer from Santa Fe by mid-morning. Good. Holt stood. Lock Kota's room from the outside. Tell the hotel man to slide the key under your door and say nothing to anyone. Diaz too, if he's staying in the hotel. Diaz left town. I watched him ride south 20 minutes ago. All right. That's either Kota cutting him loose or Kota sending a message somewhere. Either way, note the time and the direction. He moved toward the door. Where's Garza? Still on the bench. I sent a rider up with a note after you left for the anchor this afternoon. Get him down here by dawn. I want someone on Kota's door who isn't you, and I want you rested enough to be sharp tomorrow. Rivas started to object. Holt held up a hand. You've been awake since before I rode into this county. So have I. Tomorrow needs us both. Rivas thought about it, which was itself a sign of how tired he was. All right. Dawn came gray and still, the heat not yet committed, the bench road running north in the flat light like something ruled on paper. Holt was at the sheriff's office by 5:30 with 2 cups of coffee that were better than Revis's pot, and a head that had slept 4 hours and considered them adequate. Garza arrived at 6, rode in from the bench road with the dusty, unhurried look of a man who has been up since before he was asked to be. He took the coffee without comment and listened to Holt lay out the day's work, and when Holt finished he said, "The Amaya family. Miss Pilar. She's going to want to know what's happening." "She'll know by midday," Holt said. "For now, I need Kota's door watched and Kasner located." "Kasner slept in the anchor bunkhouse," Garza said. "I checked this morning before I rode down. He's there." Holt looked at him. "How did you know to check?" "Because Ariola was my friend," Garza said. He said it the way a man says a plain fact. "I've been watching the anchor hands for 6 weeks." There was nothing to add to that, so Holt didn't. He left Garza at the hotel and walked to the land office where Enrique Amaya had been since before dawn, the lamp burning in the front window, the leather journal open on the table. He looked up when Holt came through the door, and his face did not change, but his hands went still on the journal. "Close the journal," Holt said. "I need you to listen and not write." Enrique closed it. Holt told him. Not everything. Not Kota's name yet, not the hotel room conversation, but the shape of it. That the range war had been manufactured. That a third party had used Drummond's hostility as cover for a separate scheme. That the homestead filings were fraudulent. That the men who killed Ariola and the others were known and would be arrested today. He watched Enrique's face as he spoke, and what he saw there was something he had not expected, which was not relief. What it was a slow, controlled fury. The fury of a man who has spent 2 years blaming the right people for the wrong reasons, and now has to reassemble the whole picture with different pieces. "Drummond did not order the hangings," Enrique said. "It was not a question, and it was not absolution. It was the sound of a man inserting a fact into a framework it changes. He put the men in the field who did it. Whether that makes him culpable under territorial law is a question for a judge." Holt put his hat on the table. "What I need from you is the original lease documentation. Everything. Survey maps, the Santa Fe filing receipt, every letter exchanged with Drummond's lawyer, every record of every incident over the last 2 years. Your journal. You want to take the journal. I want to keep it safe while this moves through a court." Enrique looked at the journal, looked at Holt. He picked it up and held it for a moment. 2 years of meticulous record, the labor of a man who understood that documentation was the only weapon available to him in a county where everything else was weighted against his family. And then he set it on the table in front of Holt. "You said the range war was manufactured," he said. "Manufactured for what purpose?" "That's the piece I'm still building." "But you know who built it." "Yes." "Tell me the name." Holt looked at him. Enrique was 27 years old and had spent 2 years watching his family's herders die on a range that was legally theirs, filing letters that moved at the pace of bureaucracy while men moved at the pace of rope and horses. And the name was something he had earned and something that, once given, would produce in him an impulse that could complicate the next 24 hours. Holt weighed this. "Reyes Kota," he said. "He'll be in custody before noon. Don't come to the hotel. Don't bring your father into town. Let me work." Enrique's face did something controlled and complicated. He said, "Ariola's family is in Mora County. He has a wife. 2 daughters. I'll write the notification." "No," Enrique said. "I will write it. That is ours to do." He looked at the journal on the table. "Take it. Bring it back when this is finished." Holt took it. He left Enrique in the land office with the lamp burning and the table empty. And whatever you do with a morning when you have just been told the name of the man who unmade 3 years of your family's life. The territorial incorporation papers arrived from Santa Fe on the 9 o'clock stage, wrapped in brown paper and addressed to the county sheriff in the neat bureaucratic hand of the territorial land office. Rivas opened them at his desk with Holt across from him and Garza at the door. Mesa Meridian Land and Cattle Company. Incorporated 14 months prior. Principal investors listed as 3, a requirement of territorial law, the first being Reyes Vasquez of Las Vegas, New Mexico. The second, a man named Hargrove in Albuquerque, who turned out on closer reading to be an attorney listed as resident agent, which meant a name on a document for a fee, and the third, a company, Corriente Holdings, Las Vegas, New Mexico. Corriente Holdings, Holt said. Rivas was already pulling a second sheet. Santa Fe sent the Corriente filing, too. I asked for anything connected to Mesa Meridian. He read it. His mouth went flat. He handed it across. Corriente Holdings was a sheep operation, not a land company, not a speculator's vehicle, but an actual working sheep concern registered 4 years ago with 300 head and an operating lease on range north of Las Vegas. Its principal was listed as one Armand Villeneuve, Las Vegas, New Mexico. Holt read the name twice. Then he set the paper down on the desk. Villeneuve, Rivas said. You know that name? I know what it means. He stood. It means Kota isn't the architect. He's the builder. Villeneuve funded this. The scheme, the manufactured range war, the fraudulent filings, Drummond framed by his own lawyer's ignorance, the Amayas squeezed out from the other side, that's too organized for Kota alone. He's capable, but he's not capitalized. Villeneuve has money and motive. A sheep operation up north, looking to expand south. So the plan was never Kota's own. The execution was. The design came from above. Holt picked up his hat. Does the name Villeneuve appear in anything local? Any correspondence, any business, anyone in this county who's mentioned it? Rivas thought. 3 weeks ago, he said slowly. A letter came to the land office here, addressed to the county assessor. I saw it on Fitch's desk. I was in there for something else, property question on the East Bench Road. Return address was Las Vegas. He looked up. The name on the return was Corriente Holdings. Get Fitch. The county assessor was a small, neat man of 50, who wore his civic responsibility the way some men wear a Sunday coat, carefully, conscious of it at all times. He arrived at the sheriff's office looking apprehensive, which in Holt's experience was the baseline affect of a man who processes paperwork all day and is suddenly summoned by a federal marshal before 10 in the morning. The letter from Corriente Holdings, it turned out, was an inquiry about the assessed value of the anchor range and the Amaya lease combined in the event of consolidation under a single owner. A real estate question, framed politely and legally, the kind that legitimate buyers ask. Fitch had sent back the assessed figures as a matter of public record. He had kept the original letter. He produced it. Holt read it. The letterhead was clean, the language was measured, and at the bottom it was signed by Armand Villeneuve. The handwriting was nothing like the hotel registers. It was large, open, unhesitating, the signature of a man who has never needed an alias and does not intend to start. When did this arrive? Holt asked. 3 weeks, perhaps 4, Fitch said. I didn't think anything of it. We get these sorts of inquiries from time to time. Has Corriente Holdings or Villeneuve sent anything since? No. Has anyone asked you about this letter since you received it? Anyone at all? Fitch thought. One man. About 2 weeks ago. He stopped in, said he was doing a property survey for a land company out of Las Vegas and wanted to confirm the assessed boundaries. Well-dressed. Very polite. Holt set the letter down on the desk. Scar along the left jaw. Yes, Fitch said. How did you? Thank you, Mr. Fitch. After Fitch left, Rivas looked at Holt across the spread of papers on the desk. The Mesa Meridian filing, the Corriente Incorporation, the hotel register, Enrique's journal, Pollard's draft statement waiting for a signature. So Kota was doing recon for Villeneuve's scheme on the same day he was running the scheme. He's thorough, Holt said. There was no admiration in it. What do we do about Villeneuve? For now, nothing. We can't touch him from here. He's in Las Vegas. He's got no direct connection to the violence. And a territorial charge for funding a scheme through a legal entity takes time to build. But Kota's statement will implicate him. Once Kota's in custody and talking, Villeneuve becomes a federal case. He looked at the window. The street outside was busy now, mid-morning. People moving past who had no idea that the shape of the range they'd been living next to for 2 years had just been redrawn. Kota's ready. He made a decision last night, and he's sitting in that room thinking about how it lands. I go back in there now with everything we've got. He'll give us Villeneuve on top of everything else. You trust that? I trust that Kota understands his position. He's been caught, and he knows it, and the one variable left to him is whether he goes down alone or whether he gives us Villeneuve and takes what consideration a federal judge might allow for that. Holt stood and buttoned his coat. Self-interest is the most reliable thing there is. More reliable than loyalty, and considerably more reliable than conscience. Rivas looked at him. You sound like you've been here before. Abilene, Holt said. This time, the witness doesn't recant. He picked up Enrique's journal, and the Corriente papers, and the hotel register, and walked out into the warming morning toward the hotel, where Reyes Kota was waiting in a room with its door locked from the outside. He was halfway across the street when he heard Garza shout from the hotel doorway. He ran. The hotel room was empty. The window to the alley stood open. The bed had not been slept in, and the table was bare, and the glass that had held Kota's drink was gone, which meant Kota had taken it, which meant he had been thinking well past the moment Holt left, and had moved before the lock went on the door. The lock was a simple thing, a hook and eye on the outside of the door, put there for the opposite purpose, to lock a room from within. And Kota had slipped it from inside using a bent wire or a thin blade, something any man with patience and time and the right experience would carry. Garza stood in the alley doorway. He went east. I found the wire on the floor when I came to check the room. 20 minutes ago, maybe 30. I was at the front desk. Holt stood in the empty room and looked at the open window and the alley beyond it, and the slice of open country visible past the end of the alley, the bench road running north, and the CAPROCK beyond it catching the morning sun. He's going to the bench, he said. Why the bench? Holt turned from the window. He already had his hat and was moving. Because there's nothing left for him here, and the only leverage he has left is up there. He went through the door into the corridor at a walk that was not running, because running in a hotel corridor tells everyone in the building something has gone badly wrong, and he didn't need the town knowing that yet. Garza came with him. The Amayas, he said. The Amayas. They went out the front of the hotel, into the sharp morning light, and Holt went straight for the mare at the sheriff's rail, and Rivas came out of the office at the sound of boots on the boardwalk. Kota's gone, Holt said. He untied the mare. Ride for the bench. Garza's with me. Stay below the switchbacks and cut anyone off who comes down. Rivas said, if he's got a gun on that family. Then we work carefully. Holt swung up. He's not going to hurt them unless he has to. They're leverage, not targets. He needs them to talk his way out of the territory. He turned the mare north. As long as I can get up there before he decides he doesn't need them anymore. The mare hit the bench road at a lope, and Garza came up beside him on a black gelding, and the two of them went north through the morning at a pace the horses could hold, and the switchbacks came up fast, and Holt took the first turn tight against the CAPROCK wall, and the second at the same pace, and came out on the bench rim into the full morning light and pulled the mare up hard. The bench ran open and gold and still before him. The sheep were gone from the meadow. The Amaya camp was 200 yards ahead, the tents visible, the cook fire cold. And between the camp and the CAPROCK edge in the open grass, 3 figures, Tomas and Pilar Amaya, standing close together, and behind them, with one hand on Pilar's shoulder and the other holding a revolver pointed at the old man, Reyes Kota. He had not run for the border. He had come here instead, which meant the calculation Holt had made about self-interest and leverage was right, and the calculation about the Amayas being safe as long as they were useful was the one he needed to be right about now. He stopped the mare. He did not reach for his rifle. Kota saw him. Across 200 yards of open grass, the two men looked at each other in the flat morning light, and Kota's hand was on Pilar's shoulder, and the revolver was on Tomas, and nothing moved, and the sheepdogs sat at the edge of the meadow, watching with the bright, patient attention of dogs that understand something is wrong and are waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Stay here, Holt said to Garza. He stepped the mare forward at a walk. Behind him, he heard Garza cock his rifle and settle it across his saddlebow, which was the right thing to do, and the thing Holt had been counting on Garza to do. He kept his eyes on Kota, and his hands on the reins, and his rifle in the scabbard, and walked the mare forward through the bench grass while the morning light came down flat and hard on all of them, and the sheepdogs waited, and Tomas Amaya stood very straight with a gun pointed at him, and looked at Holt coming across the grass with the black eyes of a man who has outlasted worse and is betting on doing it again. Pilar's face was still. She was watching Holt, not the gun. Her hands were at her sides. Holt was 50 yards out when Kota said, clear and carrying across the grass, "Stop there." He stopped. "We're going to ride north," Kota said. His voice was steady, the argument cadence gone. What was left was operational and flat. "The 3 of us. The girl rides with me. The old man follows. You and your deputies stay on this bench until we're clear of the county." Holt sat the mare. The morning was very quiet. Somewhere behind him, on the CAPROCK rim, a hawk called once, and the sound of it went out across the bench and dissolved. "You know that doesn't end well," Holt said. "It ends with me clear of this county. For a day. Maybe 2. Then it ends in a different county, and you've added kidnapping to what's already there." "Marshal." Kota's voice sharpened. "I am not bargaining. I am telling you what is going to happen." Holt looked at Pilar. She looked back at him, and her expression was the same expression she had worn on the main street of Arroyo Seco, and on the switchback, and in the camp the evening before, still watchful and entirely without panic. She had been watching the CAPROCK rim for 2 years. She had been preparing for something like this, in the back of her calculations, for longer than she'd said to anyone. Her eyes went to his rifle in the scabbard. They went back to his face. Then they went to Kota's hand on her shoulder. And then, very deliberately, she dropped straight down. She folded at the knees and went to the grass in one motion, and Kota's hand closed on empty air, and his eyes went to her, and his revolver swung off Tomas for the half-second it took him to find her. And that was when Tomas Amaya, 63 years old, and arthritic, and not afraid of difficulty, drove his elbow backward into Kota's ribs with everything 40 years of rope work had put in his forearms. Kota went sideways. Holt was off the mare and moving before Kota hit the ground. Chapter 5. He covered the 20 yards at a dead run and came down on Kota hard, driving a knee into the man's back before he could roll and get the revolver up. The revolver was still in Kota's hand. Holt pinned the wrist against the bench grass, and the gun came free and skittered through the grass stems and stopped in the dirt. Tomas Amaya stood over them both, breathing through his nose, his arthritic hands still balled at his sides. Pilar was already on her feet. She had not run. She stood 6 feet from where Kota had gone down, and she was brushing grass from her coat and watching Holt work with the attentive calm of someone observing a task being done correctly. Kota did not struggle after the first 2 seconds. He was a man who understood odds, and the odds had changed, and fighting them would only add to his situation without improving it. Holt cuffed him, stood, retrieved the revolver from the grass. "He's yours," Garza said from behind him. He had come up at a trot across the bench, rifle across his saddle, and he dropped from the black gelding and took Kota by the arm and pulled him to his feet with more force than was strictly necessary and somewhat less than the situation warranted. "Where's Rivas?" Holt said. "Below the switchbacks. You said to stay below. Ride down and bring him up. I want a witness when Kota gives his statement." Garza looked at Kota with the flat, attentive look of a man measuring something. "And the Amayas?" "Stay on the bench," Holt told Tomas. "Both of you. Don't come into town until I send word." Tomas looked at him. He looked at Kota, standing in the bench grass cuffed, and in the old man's expression was everything 2 years of harassment and 3 dead men had put there, and none of it translated into anything rash. He nodded once and turned back toward the camp. Pilar went with him, and once she fell into step beside her father, she did not look back. Garza rode for the switchbacks. Holt stood Kota up and walked him toward the horses, and Kota went without resistance, picking his way through the bench grass with the unhurried composure of a man who has decided that the next several hours are simply a thing to be endured, and has organized himself accordingly. "You ran the wrong direction," Holt said. "I know that now." "You knew it then. You came here anyway." Kota said nothing for 3 strides. "Then, I needed to see if the family would move. If they'd sell now, with everything collapsing, it would have simplified things considerably. So you held them at gunpoint to ask." "I ran out of other options." He said it without defensiveness, as a plain assessment. Holt tied him to the saddle of Garza's spare horse, the one Garza had brought up at Holt's instruction the previous night, anticipating exactly this use, and they waited in the bench grass while the morning grew around them, and the sheep drifted back toward the meadow as if nothing had happened, which from their point of view was accurate. Rivas came up the switchbacks at a lope and pulled in beside them with the look of a man who has been sitting below a situation he couldn't see for 20 minutes and has been filling the time by imagining the worst outcomes. He took in Kota, cuffed and mounted, and the expression on his face moved from relief to a kind of grim satisfaction and settled somewhere between them. "Drummond's lawyer," Holt said. "Pell. We need him today, before Kota talks to anyone else. Ride back down and send a wire to Las Cruces. Tell him his client's situation has changed substantially, and he needs to come to Arroyo Seco with everything he has on the Vasquez documents. He'll want time. Tell him he doesn't have it." They came down the switchbacks in single file, Kota in the middle, and rode into Arroyo Seco at mid-morning with the sun already hot on the caliche, and the main street doing what it did when something came in from the north that required looking at. Holt put Kota in the cell that Pilar had vacated the night before, and locked it, and Kota sat on the bunk and looked at the ceiling, and appeared to be doing arithmetic. "You'll want to talk to your lawyer," Holt said. "I don't have a lawyer in this territory." "Then you'll want to think carefully about your next conversation with me, because it will matter a great deal to how the prosecutor in Santa Fe frames what you've done here." Kota turned his head from the ceiling and looked at him through the cell door. "Have you sent for a federal prosecutor?" "Wire went this morning." "How long does that take?" 3 days. 4. Kota returned to the ceiling. "I'll be ready," he said. Holt left him with the ceiling and went to find Garza. The rest of the day moved in the compressed way that days move when there is too much to do and enough daylight to do most of it. Rivas sent the wire to Pell and pulled the county land records, and Garza located Kasner at the anchor and confirmed his presence without alerting him, and Holt spent 2 hours with the county records and Enrique's journal building the paper trail from Corriente Holdings through Mesa Meridian to the fraudulent homestead filings, and writing a summary document that a federal prosecutor could read in an hour and understand completely. He went back to Kota at 3 in the afternoon. Kota had not moved from the bunk in any meaningful sense. He had removed his coat and folded it on the end of the mattress and sat in his shirt sleeves with his back against the cell wall and the look of a man who had been doing what he'd said he'd do, which was thinking. "Suarez," Kota said before Holt pulled the chair up. "He's still on the bench." "Who is Suarez?" "A man who works for me. He was up on the East Rim this morning." "He was." Kota's mouth went briefly tight. "Insurance. If things went poorly at the camp." "Insurance for what?" "For getting off the bench if I needed to." He had horses at the base of the East Drop. Holt pulled the chair up and sat. "Describe him." Kota described a compact man, dark, mid-30s, who favored a short-barreled pistol worn cross-draw, and who had been with Kota since Las Vegas, and who would, Kota said without drama, do what he was told if Kota did not arrive to give him further instructions, which meant he would wait at the East Drop until dark and then ride south with the horses. "Unless," Holt said. Kota looked at him. "Unless he saw what happened on the bench this morning. If he did, he may go to the Amaya camp instead." "He knows the camp." "Why the camp?" "Because I told him, if anything went wrong, the Amaya family was his way out of the territory. He'd hold one of them and ride north until he was clear." Holt was out of the chair before Kota finished the sentence. Garza was already saddled when Holt came out of the office, not because he knew what had just happened, but because he had been saddled for an hour on the instinct that the day was not finished. That instinct was one of the things that made him a good deputy. "North," Holt said. He untied the mare. "Garza, ride for the bench. Go straight to the Amaya camp and don't stop for anything on the road. If a man named Suarez is there, hold him. If he's already taken anyone, send a rider back to town immediately and keep tracking north." "You," Garza said, already moving. "I'll be 2 minutes behind you." He went back inside. Rivas was at the desk. "Lock Kota's room at the hotel from the outside. Put the key under your door. Then arm yourself and meet me at the north end of town in 10 minutes. Rivas looked at him. "What's happening?" Kota had a man on the bench. "Insurance." He took his rifle from the rack and checked the load. "If Suarez saw the arrest this morning, he may go for the Amayas." Jesus, Rivas said quietly. He was already reaching for his coat. Don't stop at the hotel. Send your deputy. I don't have a deputy. Then send the Prescott boy. He was out the door. The mare had a view on being ridden hard twice in one day, and expressed it in the first quarter-mile with a flatness in her gait that was not quite refusal, and not quite complaint, and communicated both. Holt let her set the pace she'd sustain, and she settled into a strong canter that ate the bench road with the efficiency of an animal who knows the route. The switchbacks came up, and she took them with her ears forward, lungs working, no protest. He crested the bench rim and pulled up. The camp was 200 yards ahead. Garza was there, off his horse, talking to Enrique at the tent entrance. The sheep were on the meadow. The cook fire was cold. Tomas was visible at the stone tank, sitting on his low stool. No Pilar. He rode in hard. She went to check the east draw, Enrique said. His voice was controlled, but his hands were not. 30 minutes ago. She goes there every afternoon to check the stakes, the ones we didn't pull. She didn't come back. The east draw. Holt looked at the caprock rim to the east, the broken limestone edge above the drainage where Ariola had found the survey stakes 9 days ago, and had gone back 6 days ago, and had not come back. How far? Half-mile along the rim. There's a trail down the caprock face into the drainage. Enrique's jaw was set. I'm going. You're not, Holt said. Stay with your father. Garza stays here. He looked at Garza. Anybody comes off that rim who isn't me or Pilar Amaya, shoot first. He put the mare east along the rim trail at a run. The rim trail ran close to the caprock edge through scattered juniper and limestone rubble, and the mare picked it fast, knowing the footing was unreliable, and choosing each stride with the quick mechanical judgment of a horse that has learned which of its rider's urgencies are real. Holt had his rifle across his saddle. The afternoon light came off the caprock in long angles, throwing hard shadows from every outcrop. He heard them before he saw them. Voices below the rim. Pilar's first, low and steady, the tone of someone talking to keep a conversation going rather than because conversation was what the moment called for. And a man's voice answering in Spanish, short syllables, the cadence of instruction. Holt pulled the mare up behind a limestone outcrop 15 feet from the rim edge, and tied her to a juniper branch and went to the edge on foot. 20 feet below, on a narrow shelf of rock above the drainage floor, Pilar stood with a compact man behind her, one arm across her shoulders, a short-barreled pistol at her ribs. He was dark, mid-30s, and he wore the cross-draw rig that Kota had described, and he had 2 horses on long leads tied to a juniper root at the base of the caprock face, and he was watching the drainage below him rather than the rim above. Which was the mistake? Men in a hurry watch the direction they're going. Holt lay down on the rim and looked at the angle. 16 feet of drop, the rock shelf 8 feet wide, Suarez with his back partly to the caprock face. If he fired from here, the shot went downward and left through limestone air. If Suarez moved left, the rock face stopped him. If he moved right, he went off the shelf into the drainage. Pilar was talking. She had not stopped talking since he'd first heard her voice. She was telling Suarez in Spanish, slow enough that Holt could follow most of it, that the drainage trail was washed out 20 yards north of where they stood, that the horses wouldn't make it through the loose shale below, that there was a better way out if he'd listened to her. She was buying time. She did not know Holt was on the rim above her, but she was buying time anyway, because it was what the situation required, and because she was, as Rivas had said, careful in ways that came from long experience of having no margin for being otherwise. Suarez said something sharp. Pilar went quiet. Holt shifted on the rim. The pistol was at her ribs, and at 16 feet a rifle shot was the wrong tool. The distance was right for a handgun, and he had one, but drawing and firing downward off a rim edge into a man half behind a woman was a geometry problem with a very narrow solution. He needed Suarez to move. He picked up a piece of limestone from the rim, the size of a fist, light enough to throw far, and lobbed it out over the drainage, away from the shelf, into the juniper scrub on the far side. It cracked through branches and hit the drainage floor, and Suarez's head went left toward the sound, the pistol going with his body, and Pilar drove her right elbow back into his solar plexus and stepped forward, and Holt was already on his feet at the rim edge. "Federal Marshal," he said. "Don't." Suarez had the pistol up. He was bent at the middle from the elbow, and his eyes were moving between Holt on the rim and Pilar, who had put 4 feet between them and turned to face him. His breathing was audible. 16 feet, Holt said. "I've got a rifle, and you've got a short barrel, and she's not between us anymore." He kept the rifle steady on Suarez's chest. "Work out the rest yourself." Suarez worked it out. The pistol dropped to his side. It did not go all the way down, which was the answer of a man who hadn't fully decided yet, and that half-decision was its own problem. "All the way," Holt said. Suarez looked at Pilar, then at Holt. He set the pistol on the rock shelf. "Miss Amaya," Holt said, "there's a trail back up the CAPROCK face to your left." "I know the trail," she said. She was already moving toward it. Holt kept the rifle on Suarez until Pilar had cleared the shelf, and he heard her boots on the CAPROCK face behind and above him. Then he called down, "Turn around." Hands on the rock. He brought Suarez down the drainage on a lead rope tied to Holt's saddlehorn, walking, while Holt rode above on the rim trail. It was not elegant transport, but it was functional, and it left Holt's hands free, which was the only calculation that mattered. Pilar rode beside him on her own horse, which she had retrieved from where she'd left it tied at the head of the drainage trail before she'd gone down to check the stakes. She had gone down there alone and unarmed, as she did every afternoon, to check the pulled stake marks in the caliche. The same way she had ridden the rim trail to check for watchers every morning for 2 years. The routine of a woman who had accepted that vigilance was simply part of running sheep on this particular bench in this particular county, and who had not stopped doing it even after a federal marshal arrived and told her the situation was in hand. She was right not to have stopped. He did not tell her this because she knew it. "When did he take you?" Holt said. "I came down the CAPROCK trail into the drainage, and he was at the bottom waiting." Her voice was level, the account delivered with the precision of someone filing a report. He had been watching from the rim. He saw the arrest on the bench this morning. "Kota told me he might." She looked at him across the rim trail. "After he told you, how long before you came?" "About 4 minutes." She turned forward. "All right. I'm sorry it wasn't 3. 3 would have been better," she said. And there was nothing in it but accuracy, which was the Amaya family's default currency, and one he had come to rely on. They brought Suarez into camp to find Garza at the tent entrance, and Tomas still on his stool by the stone tank, and Enrique 20 yards out toward the east rim on foot, coming back at a run when he saw them clear the juniper line. He reached his sister in 3 strides, and stopped and looked at her and said something in Basque, and she answered briefly, and he put his hand on her shoulder once, and then stepped back and looked at Suarez with the controlled fury that had been living behind his eyes for 2 years and was now, for the first time, pointed at a man who had actually earned it. "Enrique," Holt said. Enrique looked at him. "He'll be in a cell tonight. Let me work." The younger man held his gaze for a moment. Then he turned and went back to the tent. They rode down the switchbacks at dusk with Suarez between Holt and Garza, and Rivas met them at the foot of the CAPROCK with a deputy Holt hadn't seen before, a young man from the south end of the county who had ridden in that afternoon when the Prescott boy reached him. Rivas had Suarez in a cell by 7, and Kota's hotel room locked from the outside with the key under his office door by 7:30, and by 8 the three of them were at the desk with the spread of documents and a lamp turned up bright. "He's talking tomorrow," Holt said. "Kota. He's been thinking all day, and he knows what he's facing, and he'll give us what he has in exchange for whatever he can get. The question is whether we've got everything we need to verify what he says before he says it." "Correnti Holdings," Rivas said. He tapped the Territorial Incorporation. "Villeneuve. We know the name, but we've got nothing connecting him to the violence. Kota's statement will do that, but Kota's statement is interested testimony from a man with every reason to shift blame upward." "We need independent corroboration," Holt said. "The bank transfers, if Santa Fe can pull the Corriente Holdings account records. The survey crew, 3 men from Las Vegas who drove those stakes on the Amaya lease. One of them will talk if they understand the alternative." "The hotel register has them," Rivas said. "Send a wire tonight to the Las Vegas Marshal's office. Names Montoya, Harmon, and Reese. Find out if any of those are real, and find whoever drove those stakes. It's 9 o'clock. The wire doesn't sleep." Rivas went. Garza began pulling the hotel register apart by date, and cross-referencing the names against the county visitor log that the livery stable kept, which was more comprehensive than most official records, because the liveryman charged different rates based on how long you intended to stay, and had therefore developed a meticulous habit of noting arrivals and departures. Holt read through Enrique's journal for the second time, more slowly. 2 years of entries written in English in a clear, deliberate hand, every incident documented with date, time, witness, and physical evidence where it existed. It was the record of a family conducting itself with the discipline of people who understood that without documentation they had nothing, and with it they had something that courts could not ignore, even if everything else in the county was weighted against them. He closed it at 10 and went to the hotel. The room was on the ground floor, back corridor, window to the alley propped open with a boot. He had taken note of that when he'd first seen the room. Old habit, the kind that runs below conscious thought. And now he stepped over the boot and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the open window. He had not slept since the previous morning. The tiredness was not sharp. It had gone past sharp sometime in the afternoon and settled into a dull operational weight that he knew from experience would lift when it needed to and could be trusted to do so. He lay back with his boots on and his hat on the side table and closed his eyes. The night was quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, a clock ticked with the loud indifference of clocks in hotel rooms. A horse shifted in the livery across the alley. The CAPROCK to the north was invisible in the dark, but present the way large things are present when you know the country. And somewhere up on the bench, the Amaya family was in their tents under the same stars that covered the whole basin, which did not care about any of it one way or the other, but provided light enough to travel by, which was what mattered. He slept. The sound that woke him was the key in the lock, not his lock, but the lock on Kota's room, 2 doors down the corridor, the small metal tick of it, and then the absence of sound, which was the wrong thing to happen at 2 in the morning, and woke him the way wrong things at 2 in the morning always woke him, fully and at once. He was in the corridor in 4 seconds with the revolver in his hand. Kota's door stood open. The room was dark. Holt went through it low and fast and came up with the revolver on empty air. The bed untouched, the table bare, the window to the alley gaping open, and the alley beyond it holding nothing but the dark smell of horses and adobe dust. On the corridor floor outside the door, a bent wire 6 inches thin as a coat stay. He went to the window and looked both ways down the alley. East was open country. West led back to the main street. He went east. The alley gave onto a narrow track that ran behind the feed store and the land office before it opened onto the bench road at the north end of town. He stood where the track met the bench road and looked north, and the bench road ran away from him into a darkness so complete it gave him nothing. No hoofbeats. No dust. No sound at all from that direction. He went back for the mare. Rivas was at his office door in shirt sleeves, lamp in hand, by the time Holt crossed the main street. He had heard the boot heels on the boardwalk and opened the door before Holt reached it. He read Holt's face and said, "Kota." He slipped the hook with a wire. 5 minutes ahead, maybe 10. He went east, out of the alley. Rivas was already reaching for his gun belt on the peg. The bench. There's nothing left for him here. If he goes south, he's running blind in country he doesn't know. If he goes to the bench, he still has Suarez, or thinks he does, and he knows those horses are cached at the east drop. Holt took the rifle from the rack by the door. Except Suarez is in a cell downstairs. So he'll find the camp instead. He'll find whoever's at the camp. Holt went out the door. "Wake your deputy. Bring a lamp and your shotgun and every round you have for both." Holt. He stopped. There's an abandoned line shack on the east edge of the Amaya lease. Stone construction, 1 door, 1 window. I surveyed that bench 3 years ago for a water rights dispute, and I know every structure on it. Rivas was buckling his gun belt. If Kota takes someone from the camp and needs a place to hold them while he works out how to use them, that shack is where he goes. It's defensible, and it's off the main trail. Holt looked at him. In 8 days he had revised his assessment of Dolph Rivas 3 times, and each revision had been upward. You know the approach. Every foot of it. Then you're not behind me. You're beside me. They went north, 4 strong, Holt and Rivas and 2 deputies, the young man from the South County, and an older man named Birch who was the telegraph operator's brother, and who had ridden with Rivas before on rougher nights than this, and was quiet about it in the way of men who don't need to be told what to do. No lamps on the road. The moon was 3/4 and high, and threw enough light on the caliche to ride by. And they went fast on the road and slower on the switchbacks, and came over the bench rim into a darkness that smelled of grass and cold stone, and the particular cleanness of high ground at night. Rivas led them east along the rim trail without hesitation, the trail that Holt had ridden that afternoon, and that Pilar had ridden every morning for 2 years. And after a mile, he turned them south, down a cut in the CAPROCK that dropped into the drainage, and followed the drainage floor for 300 yards before the shack materialized out of the dark ahead of them. Low stone walls, a sod roof gone to weeds, the single window on the east face throwing no light. Rivas pulled up. Everyone stopped. The shack showed nothing. "The door's on the south face," Rivas said, barely above a breath. "Horses," said the older deputy, Birch. He was pointing north along the drainage. In the moonlight, tied to a juniper 20 yards up, 2 horses stood with their heads down. Kota's horses. The ones Suarez had cached at the east drop. Kota had found them. Holt dismounted. He handed the mare's reins to Birch and went to Rivas, and they put their heads together. "You take east with 1 man. Garza." "Garza's on the bench," Rivas said. "Then Birch takes the back. The young deputy with me on the south approach." They moved into position in the dark without lamps, using the moonlight and the drainage walls, and the kind of careful silence that men develop when they have been doing this long enough to understand that noise is a decision. Holt took the young deputy, whose name was Yates he had finally asked, and came around the south face of the shack from the west, low and close to the stone wall, until they were 6 feet from the door. The door was closed. No light under it. Holt knocked twice on the stone wall sharply. "Reyes Kota. Federal Marshal. Come out with your hands clear." A long silence. The horses up the drainage shifted, and the lead ropes pulled against the juniper. Then 2 shots from inside the shack, through the door, the muzzle flash lighting the gap at the bottom. Yates went down on Holt's right with a sound between a grunt and a curse, dropping to one knee and then sitting back against the shack wall with his right hand clamped to his left forearm. Not dead. Not going to be, from the way he was swearing. Holt pressed flat against the shack wall beside the door, and reloaded the time he'd spent and thought about the interior. 1 room. 1 window on the east face, which meant Rivas had the window. If Kota was going to move, he moved through the door, which was 6 inches from Holt's back, or through the window, into Rivas's lamp. And neither was a good option for a man holding a hostage. He called out again, "Yates is alive. Nobody needs to be otherwise. Open the door." Nothing. Then, inside the shack, a voice Holt recognized, Pilar's, steady as it ever was, carrying through the stone wall as if stone were no obstacle at all, saying something in Basque. 1 sentence. Whatever it meant, the tone was the tone of a woman who has made a decision and is informing someone of it, rather than asking permission. A pause. The door opened. Kota came through it backward, pushing Pilar in front of him, 1 arm across her shoulders and the revolver at her temple, the revolver that he had not had on the bench that morning, because Holt had taken it, and that he had therefore acquired in the hours since, which meant there had been a 3rd man somewhere in this county that Holt had not accounted for, and he filed that away for later. Kota stepped out of the doorway, into the moonlit drainage with Pilar between him and everything, and looked north toward where his horses were, and south toward where Holt pressed against the shack wall 2 feet from him. They were very close. Too close for a rifle, too close for most calculations. Holt could smell the road dust on Kota's coat. "Step away from the wall," Kota said. Holt stepped away from the wall. He held the rifle along his leg, muzzle down. "We're going to take those horses," Kota said. His voice had gone back to the operational register, the same voice he'd used on the bench that morning, stripped of the argument cadence, running on nothing but the immediate. "You're going to stay here." "That's not how it ends," Holt said. "You have a rifle at your leg, and I have a gun at her head, and you are 2 feet away from me and cannot use the rifle." Kota's eyes were very steady. "You know the math." He did know the math. The math was bad. Rivas was at the east window, which was behind Kota, which meant a shot from Rivas went through Kota and through Pilar, or past them both, into Holt. And Birch was north of the shack between Kota and the horses, and Birch was a telegraph operator's brother who had ridden with Rivas before, and was good for that, and possibly not for this. Kota began moving north. Pilar moved with him, neither resisting nor accommodating, moving because she had no other option yet, and her eyes said she was waiting for one. Holt went with them. Parallel, 8 feet off Kota's left shoulder, the rifle still down. Kota watched him, and Holt watched Kota, and they moved north through the drainage floor in the cold moonlight with Rivas somewhere behind the east window, and Birch somewhere ahead in the dark. 30 yards. 20. The horses were 10 yards ahead when Pilar stumbled. Her right boot caught a rock in the drainage floor, and she went forward and down, and Kota's arm went with her, tightening to catch her or hold her, and the revolver swung off her temple for the half-second that catching 60 pounds of downward momentum requires even from a strong man. Holt dropped into the drainage grass and rolled left. The shot that Kota fired went high and right, over where Holt had been standing, And then Holt was coming back up out of the grass roll, and Kota was trying to find him in the moonlight, and Pilar had gone all the way to the ground, and was rolling away from Kota's feet, and from the north, from behind the horses, Birch's voice said, "Hands. Now." Birch had a shotgun and 2 feet of moonlit ground between himself and Kota, and had gotten there at the right moment, which suggested that riding with Rivas on rough nights had taught him something after all. Kota looked at the shotgun, looked south toward where Holt was coming up out of the grass, looked at Pilar on the ground to his left, already on her hands and knees, already rising. He lowered the revolver. It did not touch the ground. He held it pointed down, at the end of a straight arm, which was not quite surrender, and was the closest he was going to get to it out here in a drainage ditch at 2 in the morning, with everything he'd spent 14 months building, now sitting in a cell in Arroyo Seco, and a federal prosecutor 3 days away on the Santa Fe stage. "Set it down," Holt said. He set it down. Holt came forward and picked up the revolver and looked at Kota in the moonlight, and Kota looked back at him with the expression he'd worn in the Abilene courtroom, the long, measuring look, the one that calculated distances and stored them. Only now, the distances it was calculating were different ones. "Twice," Kota said. Not quite to Holt, not quite to himself. "Twice," Holt agreed. He cuffed him. Rivas came around the east end of the shack with his shotgun, and Birch held the horses, and they got Pilar up and Yates stabilized. The wound was through the meat of the forearm and would heal, the doctor would see to it in the morning. And they began the long ride back down through the drainage and up the switchbacks and south toward the lights of Arroyo Seco. And Reyes Kota rode between them in the dark, and said nothing more, and there was nothing more to say. Chapter 6. The grass was cold and wet against his cheek. He had been flat in it for 6 minutes, long enough that the chill had moved from his skin to his chest, and the man holding Pilar Amaya had not moved in that time, had not looked left, had not shifted his grip on the revolver, and Holt had been counting on him doing at least one of those things. His name was Suarez, and he worked for Kota the way some men work for people they fear rather than respect, which made him thorough in following instructions and poor at adjusting when the instructions ran out. The instruction had been to hold the woman until Kota arrived. Kota was not arriving. Suarez knew this now, and had begun to know it approximately 4 minutes ago. And a man who knows his principal is not coming is a man running out of reasons to hold a position. Rivas was in the dark to the east with 2 deputies. Garza was behind the line shack itself, covering the door. Holt was 20 feet south of Suarez in grass that came to his shoulder when he knelt and to his chest when he went prone, and the moon was behind a cloud bank that had been building since midnight and would break at some point that he could not predict. The revolver was at Pilar's temple. She stood with her shoulders back and her chin level, the way she had stood on the switchback road with a rifle crack still in the air above her, the way she had stood on the main street of Arroyo Seco with areola draped across the back of a stranger's horse. 20 feet separated them, and 20 feet in grass this high and this dark was an argument against a handgun and in favor of patience, and patience was the one thing Holt had left in quantity. He waited. Suarez said into the dark around him, "Kota." Then louder, "Senor Kota." Then nothing, because the dark gave him nothing back. Pilar said quietly, in the tone of someone making a reasonable observation, "He's gone." "Calla," Suarez said. "You know he's gone. You've known it for several minutes." Her voice was even, unhurried, the voice of a woman who has spent her working life in open country and understands that raising your voice accomplishes nothing that your words cannot. There is a federal marshal in this grass, and a sheriff to the east, and a deputy behind the building. You held your position. You did what you were told to do. The man you were doing it for chose to run rather than come. A pause so brief, it was barely a breath. Set the gun down. A long silence. The cloud bank shifted, and the moon came through, and Holt could see them both clearly now. Suarez's profile, the line of his jaw set hard, the revolver arm beginning to drop by centimeters in the way an arm drops when the conviction behind it drains away. Pilar had not moved. She was looking out into the grass, directly toward where Holt lay. Not because she could see him, but because she had triangulated where he had to be, which was the sort of thing she did. The revolver came down. Suarez set it on the ground, and stepped back from it, and put his hands up, and said something in Spanish that Holt did not catch. He rose out of the grass. Rivas came in from the east with a lamp. Garza came around the corner of the shack. One of the deputies materialized from the dark to the north, which was not where Holt had put him, but the result was the same. Holt cuffed Suarez and handed him to Garza, and went to Pilar. She was brushing grass from the front of her coat, with the brisk efficiency of someone clearing up after an inconvenience. Her hands were entirely steady. "You told him to set it down," Holt said. "Someone had to." She pulled a stem of grama grass from her collar and dropped it. "You were waiting for him to move." "He wasn't going to move. He was too frightened." "You knew I was in the grass." "I knew you were somewhere. A man like you doesn't set up a perimeter and stay out of it." She looked at him for a moment, an assessment rather than an expression. "Is Kota taken?" "Not yet." She nodded, accepting this the way she accepted things that required further work. "My father." "Safe. Garza had him at the camp by 10 o'clock. She turned then, and looked out across the dark bench, the moonlit grass running to the caprock edge, the sheep on the far meadow visible as a pale shifting mass. Something in her posture changed. Not a collapse, nothing so dramatic, more like the slight loosening of something held under tension for a very long time. She stood that way for a moment, facing the bench, and Holt stayed where he was and said nothing. Then she turned back. "Where will you find him?" "South," Holt said. "He's running for the territorial line. He's on horseback, 5 hours ahead in country he doesn't know as well as he thinks he does." He looked in the same direction she had looked. "I'll find him." She studied him. "You've done this before. Found men who run. It's more or less the job. Does it get easier?" He thought about Decker Foy, still 5 days south on a trail gone cold, the original reason he had ridden into this county. He thought about Abilene and the courtroom and Kota's face across it. "The finding does," he said. "The rest of it doesn't change much." She considered this. "Then go." He went. He caught Kota at a dry crossing 11 miles south, at the place where the breaks country opened into a long arroyo that ran east toward the Cimarron and offered 3 ways out and 1 good way across, and the one good crossing was the one Holt reached first. He had covered the distance hard, the mare running on the better ground and picking her way on the broken, and he came down into the arroyo from the north rim, 20 minutes before Kota arrived from the west, which gave him enough time to water the mare and rest her on the limestone shelf above the crossing and watch the western approach through the gray pre-dawn. Kota came through the arroyo mouth at a walk. His horse was done, head low, moving with the labored mechanical stride of an animal that has been pushed past its honest limit and is making a study in loyalty over sense. Kota himself sat straight, coat still buttoned, as if the fact that his horse was destroyed and a federal warrant was somewhere behind him were matters he had not yet chosen to acknowledge. He saw Holt on the limestone shelf above the crossing at 50 yards and stopped. They stayed like that for a moment, each reading the ground between them. "I'd have been here regardless," Holt said. "This is the only crossing for 4 miles. I know, Kota said. I scouted it 6 months ago. He said it without bitterness, without anything, the way a man acknowledges a fact that cost him considerably. Then you know the east approach is worse, and the west rim drops 30 feet to shale. I know. Neither of them moved. The arroyo was cold, and still in the last of the night, the sky above its walls beginning to lighten in the east, in the slow, reluctant way of a dawn that has not decided yet to commit. Kota's horse stamped once and put its nose toward the water, and Kota let it drink. The woman, Kota said. Pilar, Amaya. She's unhurt. It was not a question, but it carried the shape of one. Yes. He nodded. Another fact absorbed. Suarez. In custody. Kota looked at his horse drinking. The animal pulled at the water with the desperation of something pushed beyond courtesy. I should have gone south 3 days ago, he said. When I saw you ride into Arroyo Seco, I knew who you were. You stayed to see what I'd find. I stayed because I had built something here, and I was not ready to leave it. He looked up at Holt on the shelf above him. The light was coming faster now, the arroyo walls going from black to charcoal, to the dark red of the sandstone they were cut from. You ever build something, Marshal? I arrest people who take things that aren't theirs, Holt said. That's what I've built. Kota almost smiled. That's a very minimal kind of architecture. It holds. Kota looked at him for another moment, and then reached very deliberately for his coat and opened it, showing the interior, and then reached in and removed the revolver with 2 fingers and set it on the sandstone shelf beside him, and moved his hand away from it. All right, Marshal, he said. Let's get this done. The legal machinery moved in the weeks that followed with the grinding efficiency of a system that, once in motion, does not require anyone to hurry. A federal prosecutor arrived from Santa Fe on the Thursday stage, a small, neat man named Aldrich who wore his authority in his briefcase rather than his bearing, and who read Enrique's journal in one sitting and then looked up and said quietly, "This is excellent documentation." Kota was transported to Santa Fe for arraignment on charges that the prosecutor read aloud in Rivas's office for the formal record: attempted murder of Silas Drummond, conspiracy to defraud the Territorial Land Office, 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, suborning false witness. He sat through the reading in the chair by the window, with his hands cuffed in his lap, and his coat still buttoned, and his face arranged into an expression that was neither resignation nor defiance, but something between them that had no common name. He gave them Villeneuve. He gave them everything. The original arrangement, the money that had moved from Corriente Holdings through a Las Vegas bank account into the Mesa Meridian Operating Fund, the specific instructions Villeneuve had given, and the specific latitude Kota had taken beyond them. He gave them dates, amounts, names of the bank officers who had processed the transfers. Aldrich wrote it all down in a small, careful hand, and at the end said that Villeneuve's attorneys were going to be very busy for a long time. Pollard signed his revised statement on the Thursday morning before the prosecutor arrived, in Rivas's office with Rivas and Holt present, and Garza at the door. He signed it without ceremony, with the air of a man who has decided that the side he chose is not the side that is going to win, and would like to be on record as having corrected himself before the record hardened. Holt told the prosecutor about the cooperation. Aldrich noted it without committing to anything, which was the honest answer. Kasner was arrested at the Anchor bunkhouse on the Wednesday morning by Rivas and Garza without incident, which meant that when Rivas told him why he was being arrested, he went gray and sat down on his bunk and stayed there. He gave up the other 2 men from the Cottonwood Grove before Rivas finished reading the charge. Both were anchor hands. Both were in the county. Neither of them ran. The Mesa Meridian lease challenge was voided by the Territorial Land Office on the following Monday, upon review of the fraudulent homestead affidavits. The clerk in Santa Fe, who had flagged Kota's identification 14 months earlier, sent a note to Rivas that said only, "I am glad that flag was useful." Rivas put the note in the file. The Amaya lease stood. Drummond came to see Holt on the Friday, 8 days after the cottonwood grove. He came to the sheriff's office on horseback, which at this stage of his recovery from 3 bullet wounds required a stubbornness that even Holt found notable. He dismounted slowly, with the careful engineering of a man whose left side had strong opinions about load-bearing, and came inside and sat in the chair by the window, the same chair Kota had occupied, though Drummond did not know this and Holt saw no reason to mention it. He looked better than he had any right to. The color was back in his face, and the gray beard was trimmed, and the hands on the chair arms were steady. He looked at Holt across the desk and said, "I owe you an apology." "For what, specifically?" Drummond's mouth went tight. "For Cruz. For what Cruz did on that bench with my sanction, and further than my sanction, and the fact that I cannot draw a clean line between those two things and be honest about it." He looked at the window. For 2 years of making life on that bench harder than it had to be for people who had every legal right to be there. "You're telling me, not them," Holt said. "I'll tell them too. I'm going up to the bench when I can sit a horse for more than an hour without," he shifted in the chair, "without what's happening right now. I want to tell Tomas Amaya myself. He'll appreciate that more than an apology. I know. I'm going to pull my cattle off the bench approaches. The anchor doesn't need that grass, and the Amayas do." He said it without performance, the way a man states a decision rather than announces one. Pell is withdrawing the county filing complaints. He sends his apologies to Enrique Amaya for submitting documents he didn't know were fraudulent, which I'm told is not a legal defense, but is at least the truth. Enrique will take the truth. Drummond nodded. He looked at his hands for a moment, the big root-knuckled hands that had worked this basin for 20 years. Who was Vasquez, really? A man named Reyes Kota. He ran a land scheme in Texas 3 years ago. I arrested him. The case didn't hold. He came here after that. About a year after. He needed a new name and a new territory, and he was patient enough to build from scratch. Drummond absorbed this. I was useful to him. You were. Your hostility to the Amayas was real, and he knew it, and he handed you documentation designed to make it look legally legitimate. He needed you angry and moving in the right direction. He played me. The words came out hard and flat, a man pressing on a bruise to confirm it hurts. Yes. And I let him, because I wanted a reason to do what I was already inclined to do. Holt said nothing to this. It was accurate, and Drummond knew it was accurate, and saying so would not add to the accuracy. Drummond stood, taking his time about it, his left side registering the effort. He put his hat on. At the door he stopped. "Cruz," he said. "What happens to him?" "He'll be charged. Accessory, at minimum. The 3 men from the Grove are looking at murder charges, which means they're going to give Cruz up for whatever consideration they can get. A prosecutor will decide the rest." Drummond stood with his hand on the door frame. "I gave him too much room," he said. "Knew it, and did it anyway." "That's a personal problem more than a legal one," Holt said. It came out drier than he'd intended. Drummond looked back at him, and after a moment the corner of his mouth moved. "Yes," he said. "I suppose it is." He went out. Through the window, Holt watched him get back on his horse with the careful engineering of a man who will not ask for help with something he can still manage alone, and ride back toward the anchor at a walk. The Wichita office sent a wire on the Saturday with a lead on Foy, a sighting in Tucumcari, 8 days old by the time it reached Holt, which put Foy somewhere between Tucumcari and the Texas line, depending on how fast he was moving and whether he had changed direction. The wire also noted, in the terse impersonal language of federal correspondence, that Marshal Holt's handling of the Arroyo Seco matter had been noted with approval, and that Aldrich's preliminary report to the district office was favorable. Holt read it, folded it, and put it in his coat pocket beside the 2 wires about the homestead filings that were still there from the week before, and went to find Rivas. Rivas was in the land office with Enrique, going through the Mesa Meridian County file page by page, separating what was fraudulent from what was procedurally valid and needed to be formally rescinded. It was methodical work, and both men were suited to it. Holt stood in the doorway, and Rivas looked up. "I'm riding out tomorrow," Holt said. Rivas put his pen down. "Tucumcari." "That way." Enrique had not looked up from the file. He reached to the corner of the table and produced the leather journal and slid it across to the doorway. "As promised," he said. Holt took it. "Aldrich's office will want it for the trial." "I made a copy." Enrique looked up then, the level dark eyes steady, under the same quality of patience that ran through the whole family like a vein of iron through sandstone. "I assumed they would." "Good." Holt looked at Rivas. "You'll have the Wichita office's full support on Cruz and the Grove men. Aldrich knows the file. You won't have to carry it alone." "I know," Rivas said. He looked as if he might say something else, and then didn't. He picked up his pen. Holt left them to it. He rode up to the bench for the last time that afternoon, in the long light that comes over the CAPROCK in the hour before sunset and turns everything it touches the color of old copper. The switchbacks were empty. No rifle shot from the rim, no figure watching from the first turn. The rim itself showed him nothing but limestone and sky, and the hawk that had been working those thermals all week, or a different hawk that he chose to believe was the same one. The sheep were on the near meadow now, spread across 200 yards of bench grass in the slow coherent drift that sheep achieve when they are entirely comfortable with their ground. The dogs moved the outer edges with the bright wordless efficiency of animals who have been bred for this across centuries and know it in their bones. From the crest of the switchback, Holt watched them for a few minutes before he rode in. Pilar was at the stone tank, checking the feed line that ran from the spring. She wore canvas trousers and a collarless shirt, and her hair was back, and she did not look up from the fitting she was tightening until he was close enough that the sound of the mare's hooves on the limestone shelf was directly beside her. "Marshal," she said. She set down the wrench, looked at the mare, at the saddlebags packed and tied, at the rifle in the scabbard and the bedroll behind the cantle. "Tucumcari," she said. "That direction." She wiped her hands on a rag, stood back from the tank, and looked at the flock on the meadow. The late light was full on it, the sheep white and amber in it, the grass moving slightly now as the afternoon wind came up off the basin. "Areola," she said. "His family. His wife is Esperanza. The daughters are 6 and 9. Enrique has written the notification." She kept her eyes on the flock. "She will want to know he was not alone when they brought him down from the tree. That someone stayed with him." "I'll include that," Holt said, "in my report. His name will be in the record. The whole of it." She turned then and looked at him directly, the black eyes doing what they always did, taking inventory, noting what was there and what was not. "The record," she said. "Do you believe it matters?" That it goes into a file in an office in Wichita? I believe it's the difference between a dead man's name being known and it not being known, he said. Whether that matters is your question to answer, not mine. She thought about this. A dog on the flock's south edge moved a stray ewe back with 3 short purposeful runs and then held its position. The ewe went where it was directed, and the dog lay down and the flock absorbed the correction and moved on. It matters, she said. She said it the way Tomas had said things, not as reassurance but as conclusion, a fact arrived at and stated. Does the man Foy know you're coming? He knows someone is. He doesn't know who. That seems like an advantage. It's usually enough. She pulled a length of feed line from the ground and coiled it over her forearm with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has done this 10,000 times and will do it 10,000 more. She held the coil in the crook of her arm and looked up at him on the horse. Will you come back through this county? She asked. He considered it honestly. Routes south from Tucumcari, the likely direction if Foy crossed into Texas, what came back north through New Mexico territory, and whether any of it ran through the Cimarron Breaks country. Maybe. It depends on Foy. That is an honest answer, she said. She looked at him a moment longer, then turned back toward the tank. Vaya con Dios, Marshal. He touched the brim of his hat. She was already fitting the wrench back onto the feed line. Her attention returned to the work, and that was the right way for it to end. He rode back down the switchbacks into the long shadow the CAPROCK threw across the basin floor. To the west, the sky was doing something extravagant in orange and red above the ridge where the anchor sat, and the town of Arroyo Seco was a small cluster of lights beginning to show in the darkening flat below. He did not stop at the town. He had said his goodbyes to Rivas that morning, and the remaining business was Aldrich's and Garza's and the slow machinery of the territorial court, none of which required him. He turned south at the Bench Road fork and put the mare to a road trot on the packed caliche and let her find her pace. She had opinions about evening travel, and they were generally sound. The stars were coming up ahead of him, south and east, the sky going deep blue above the horizon in that brief window before it went entirely black. Crickets in the grass at the roadside. The distant cry of something hunting in the breaks. He thought about Ariola's bare feet in the cottonwood shade. He had thought about them intermittently all week. Not the murder itself, and not the rope, and not the men who stood watching, but the man himself. The calloused hands built wrong for cattle work, the wool fibers at his shirt buttons, the feet that somebody had decided should be bare, the message they had meant to send with that. 11 years with the Amaya family. A wife named Esperanza in Mora County. 2 daughters, 6 and 9, who did not yet know and would not know until Enrique's letter reached them, and would carry the knowing after that for the rest of their lives. A man who deserved better. They usually did, in Holt's experience. The dead who ended up in his reports had almost always deserved better than what they got, and the fact of that did not get easier or harder with time. It stayed the same, which was its own kind of mercy. You did not go numb, and you did not break. You simply kept the knowledge in the same place where you kept everything else that was true and unchangeable, and you rode. Foy was somewhere ahead of him. The trail was 8 days cold, and would take patient work to pick back up, and patient work was something he had. He rode out of Arroyo Seco County the same way he'd ridden in, with one dead man's business settled and another man's still waiting. That was the job. He didn't figure it would ever stop being the job. The end. Did you get your copy of Pinkerton?